silent salute. 4 dogs, 1 secret, 0 warnings. The Thompson rooster hadn't even crowed when Aurora eased into dawn, chore sand straight into a living riddle. In the barn's amber gloom, 4 German shepherds sat statuesque, forming a line so precise it could have been drawn with a ruler. Neither straw rustled nor wind stirred. Even the dust hung suspended. Aurora's knees wobbled. These were not farm dogs gone astray. They were soldiers without uniforms, eyes tracking her every micro-movement. A breath's misstep, a heartbeat too loud, and still they remained motionless. One quietly exhaled, chest rising like a tide controlled by lunar pull. That sound alone shattered her courage. She bolted for the house, mind racing through questions no child should have to ask. Who placed them here? What mission lives behind those eyes? And most puzzling, why do I feel safer now than before I opened that door? The sky was still wearing its earliest shade of blue, a quiet veil before dawn. Cold dew clung to the edges of the porch rails, and the old wooden floorboards creaked under Aurora's small boots as she stepped outside. At just 8 years old, she had already made a habit of rising before the sun, her favorite part of the day. There was something sacred about that hour, the soft breath of the earth before it began to speak. The only sounds were her footsteps and the sleepy chirps of robins somewhere near the fence line. In one hand, she carried a dented tin bucket filled with feed, and in the other, she gripped her flashlight, though the first light of morning had already begun to nudge its way across the horizon. Her red flannel pajama pants were tucked into muddy boots, and a thick knit sweater hung slightly off one shoulder, the kind her grandmother had made before moving to the coast. Aurora didn't mind the cold. The animals were waiting. She approached the barn, the paint on its siding chipped and faded like an old storybook cover. The heavy doors loomed ahead, still damp with morning moisture. As she reached for the rusted handle, a strange stillness stopped her. The air felt different. She hesitated. No clucking chickens, no soft thuds of the horse shifting in its stall, no scurrying mice, just a hush, almost reverent. Aurora furrowed her brow and slowly pushed the barn door open. It creaked a long aching sound that broke the silence like a breath held too long. Then she froze. There, inside the barn, seated in perfect formation on a bed of straw, were 4 massive German shepherds. Their coats gleamed despite the hay, muscular, sharp-eyed, perfectly still. They didn't bark. They didn't move. They just stared at her. For a heartbeat, Aurora didn't breathe. Her body instinctively tensed, ready to bolt. These weren't neighborhood pets. These dogs looked like they had been carved from stone precision and posture, eyes like coals behind glass. Her heart pounded in her ears, but something deeper than logic made her pause. They weren't growling. They weren't threatening. They were watching her, like they knew her, like they had been waiting. She took a hesitant step backward, the metal bucket in her hand rattling softly. Her flashlight, still clutched in her grip, cast a glow over their fur, revealing subtle scars along their flanks. Not fresh, but earned. One of the dogs, the largest, tilted its head. Just slightly. Not in confusion, but like it was acknowledging her, as if it understood. Aurora's throat was dry. "Hi," she whispered. The words fell out before she could stop them. Her voice was barely a sound, but it carried across the still air like a ripple on water. None of the dogs moved. Not one. But the smallest shift of one's ear, the subtle flick of a tail against straw, it was enough. It made the moment feel real. Aurora stepped back, finally listening to the tremble in her legs. Her breath caught and twisted into something between awe and fear. Then she turned on her heel and ran. The bucket dropped with a thud, scattering feed behind her like breadcrumbs. Her boots thudded against the wet grass as she sprinted toward the house, heart hammering, lungs burning with cold morning air. She didn't look back, not once. Back at the barn, the 4 dogs remained unmoved, unbothered, silent, like statues, like soldiers at rest. But in the deepest, quietest part of each of them, something had shifted too, an instinct reawakened, a purpose rekindled. They had found her, and they weren't leaving. Aurora's voice cracked through the early morning mist, shrill and breathless. "Mom! Dad! Come quick, please! They're in the barn!" She burst through the front door, cheeks flushed, eyes wide and glassy. Her mother dropped a coffee mug that shattered on the floor, startled by the urgency in her daughter's voice. Her father, still tying the second bootlace, shot to his feet. "What is it?" he asked, already moving toward the coat rack. Aurora's small hands tugged at his sleeve. "Dogs. 4 of them. Big ones. Just sitting there." Her mother stepped forward, wrapping a sweater around her shoulders. "Rusty's in the yard. Are they strays? Did they hurt you?" Number they didn't even move. Aurora's voice dropped, as if afraid they might somehow hear her. "They were just waiting." That word chilled the room more than the open door. Her father exchanged a look with his wife. He didn't ask more. Instead, he reached for the old shovel that leaned near the back door dented, rusted but heavy enough to make a point. By the time they reached the barn, the fog had thinned slightly, but a cold stillness lingered like a breath caught in the throat of the earth. Aurora hovered behind her father. Fingers knotted in the hem of his jacket. The barn door was half open, just as she had left it. Her father slowed, gripped the shovel tighter, pushed the door wider, and then he saw them. 4 German shepherds, sitting exactly where Aurora had sat in formation, side by side on a thick bed of straw. Their ears were up, eyes locked on the new arrivals, but still, no barking, no growling. Just silence. Her mother let out a quiet gasp, one hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God." Aurora peered around her dad's waist, half hiding, heart racing again, but nothing changed. They just sat there. Her father took one step into the barn, shovel at the ready. "Get back, Aurora!" "Stay with your mom." The dogs didn't move. He took another cautious step. Still nothing. Then, without warning, the largest of them rose to its feet. Smooth, slow, controlled, a ripple of muscle beneath a dark coat. The sound of the straw shifting under its weight was the only sound in the barn. Her father froze. The dog didn't growl, didn't bare its teeth. It simply stepped forward, 1 pace, then 2. Its posture wasn't aggressive, but it was commanding. Its eyes didn't flash with anger, but intelligence, as if it were scanning him, measuring his intent, like a soldier assessing a stranger near the perimeter. The room held its breath. Her father slowly lowered the shovel an inch, just an inch. He kept his stance, but softened his grip. The dogs stopped. They stared at each other, and animal 2 protectors standing in the quiet barn light. And then, in a small voice behind them, Aurora whispered, "That's the one who looked at me, like he knew me." Her mother pulled her close. "We need to call someone," she murmured, eyes flicking from dog to dog. "Animal control. Maybe the sheriff." "They're not acting wild," her father said, still not taking his eyes off the shepherd. "They're trained. Then why are they here?" The question hung in the air like a fog that wouldn't lift. No tags, no collars, no crates, no sign of entry. Yet somehow, 4 highly disciplined, silent dogs had appeared in a locked barn overnight. Her father slowly stepped back, easing the barn door shut. "They didn't attack," he said more to himself than anyone else. "Didn't even bark." As they turned to walk back toward the house, Aurora paused and looked over her shoulder. The big dog was still standing, eyes following her through the narrow gap of the barn door. Not hostile, not afraid, just watching. She felt a strange pull in her chest. Not fear, not quite, something deeper, something she didn't have words for yet. That night, long after her parents had triple-checked the locks and gone to bed, Aurora sat at her bedroom window, staring toward the barn. She could see them 4 dark shapes in the moonlight, unmoving, silhouettes against the hay. And for the first time in her life, Aurora felt something both thrilling and terrifying at once. She was being guarded, and she didn't know why. The sun had crept above the ridge by the time her father returned to the barn that afternoon, this time without a shovel, but with an old leather leash looped through his belt just in case. He moved slower now, no longer expecting aggression, but still carrying the weight of caution. The barn smelled of hay, soil, and something faintly metallic, like old wire. The dogs were still there, exactly as before lined up, silent, statuesque. Only the flick of a tail or twitch of an ear betrayed the fact they were alive. He crouched slowly, speaking low, as if trying not to wake a sleeping giant. Easy now. Just checking. One by one, he examined them. No tags, no collars, no signs of ownership. He gently reached for the neck of the largest one, the one Aurora had named. The one who knew me. The shepherd didn't flinch. Its muscles stayed taut, alert, but it allowed him to check beneath the thick ruff of fur. Nothing. No tattoo. No brand. Just clean, powerful anatomy. Trained, disciplined, intentional. He moved down the line, murmuring quietly with each inspection. All four were similar healthy, strong, but completely unmarked. No one had claimed them. No one had named them. And yet they had appeared with a kind of order no stray ever had. When he stepped back, all four turned their heads slightly in sync, eyes following him to the door not with suspicion, but with awareness. He stood there for a moment, holding the leash loosely at his side. They didn't need it. They had chosen to stay. Back at the house, Aurora sat at the kitchen table, tracing her finger in slow circles on a napkin while her mother stirred a pot of soup that had long since gone cold. The house was unusually quiet. Even Rusty, their old retriever, had stayed curled under the porch all afternoon like. He knew his place had been taken. Her father walked in, brushing hay from his sleeves. No collars, no tags, nothing. Her mother turned, brow furrowed. "You sure they're not chipped?" "I didn't feel anything obvious. Could be under the skin, but..." He trailed off. She finished the sentence for him. "That's not how regular strays show up." "No," he said. "It's not." They sat in silence for a moment, letting that truth settle like dust. Aurora finally spoke, voice soft. "They didn't scare me." Her mother glanced at her, brushing a hand over her daughter's hair. "Maybe not. But that doesn't mean they aren't dangerous, sweetie. They didn't act dangerous." Aurora's eyes lit up, serious in a way that made her seem older than 8. "They looked at me like they knew me, like I was someone they were supposed to find." Neither parent answered right away, because deep down, they'd felt it too. That night, the wind came in restless wave-spooling at the curtains, sighing through the cracks in the windows like whispers with no words. Aurora couldn't sleep. She got up and tiptoed across her room, pulling the curtain aside. The barn sat in its usual place, beyond the vegetable patch and the old tire swing. But tonight, it didn't look ordinary. It looked like it was guarded. In the moonlight, she could just make out the faint shapes of the dogs lying outside the barn, now not inside. They were spread out like sentries on patrol, each one facing a different direction, watching, listening, protecting. Aurora's breath fogged the glass. She pressed her hand to the window pane, small fingers splayed wide. They were still out there, still waiting. But for what? Downstairs, her parents sat in the living room, the glow of the fireplace flickering against their faces. Neither spoke for a while. The silence between them wasn't angry, it was cautious, measured. The silence of two people trying to solve a puzzle with pieces they didn't recognize. Her mother finally broke it, her voice low and shaken. "They're not acting lost." Her husband didn't look up. "I know." She turned to him, eyes narrowed slightly with a mix of worry and something else of dread. "They're waiting." He finally looked at her. "Yeah," he said after a long pause. "The question is for what?" That question would echo in both their minds for days to come. And though no one said it out loud, each member of the family felt the same unease settle into their bones. These dogs hadn't wandered in from the woods. They had come with a reason, and that reason hadn't revealed itself yet. For the next 3 days, Aurora was never alone. Wherever she walked through the frost-kissed grass to the chicken coop, out by the rusted water pump, or behind the shed where the old swing creaked in the wind, they followed. No barking, no tugging, no impatient circling like Rusty used to do. Just presence, quiet, watchful, and constant. The 4 German shepherds moved like shadows, one breath behind her at all times, not intruding, protecting, as if some invisible tether connected their will to hers. At first, it unnerved her. Even when she wasn't looking, she could feel them, the way their paws barely made a sound on the gravel, the way they always positioned themselves between her and any perceived threat even, if that was just the rustle of wind in the cornstalks. Their formation was subtle but strategic, 2 in front, 2 behind, always covering her flanks. But by the 4th morning, the strangeness had faded into something gentler, something almost familiar. She started to talk to them, not in full sentences, but little murmurs, little things kids say when they're alone and don't know someone's listening. "You guys don't blink much, huh?" They didn't. At breakfast, she slipped crusts of toast into her pocket and later fed them behind the barn, crouched low in the straw. Her parents watched from the porch, unease softening into a quiet surrender. No one had come looking for the dogs, and the dogs had no intention of leaving. By the time the weekend arrived, Aurora had given each of them a name. The largest broad shoulders, coal-black coat, eyes like the edge of a storm she called night. He walked closest to her, always slightly ahead, like a silent commander. The sleek female with the silver streak down her muzzle was Luna. She moved with grace, light on her paws, and slept closest to the porch at night. The youngest-looking one, still huge, but with a boyish face and nervous ears that never quite stood upright, she named Bear. He liked to lie in the dirt beside her while she read under the willow tree. And the one with amber eyes that never seemed to blink, the one who stared into the distance like he could see things no one else. She called him Ash. What struck her parents most wasn't how the dogs followed her, but how they responded. It began with small things. Aurora would raise her hand mid-story, gesturing without thinking, and 2 of them would sit instantly. One afternoon, she spilled a bag of feed across the steps. Before her father could grab the broom, Luna had already nudged her out of the way and stood perfectly still, blocking the mess from rolling toward the door as if anticipating the cleanup. Then came the command she never meant to give. "Stop!" she yelled during a game of tag, laughing as Bear bounded toward her. But the moment the word left her lips, all 4 dogs froze mid-step, muscles locked, eyes trained on her like soldiers awaiting new orders. She blinked. So did her father, watching from the back door with a mug of coffee now halfway to his lips. "Aurora," he said gently, "did you teach them that?" She shook her head slowly. But the dogs didn't move until she smiled and said, "It's okay." Then, just like that, they resumed walking, calm, reassured, like they spoke a language only she remembered. That evening, she drew them with crayon seech, one carefully shaded, names written above their heads in big block letters. She pinned it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a paw print. Her mom looked at the sketch as she poured tea and whispered, "She's bonding with them." Her dad didn't look up from his paper. They're bonding with her. As dusk settled in that night, a soft drizzle kissed the fields. Aurora stood at the edge of the porch, watching lightning dance behind the hills. The dogs sat beside her, unmoving, unbothered by the rain. And though she didn't know how or why, she felt safe in a way she never had before. Not like the safety of locked doors or parents watching from windows. This was different. Older. Deeper. The kind of safety that didn't need explaining. The kind that came with unspoken loyalty. She turned to Knight and whispered, "You're not strays, are you?" He didn't respond, but his eyes didn't leave hers. And in that silence, wet and electric with stormlight, Aurora began to understand something too big to name. They hadn't just followed her. They'd found her. The late afternoon, light dripped gold through the sycamore trees, casting long fingers of shadow across the edge of the property. Aurora was playing her usual game of pretensome mashup of explorer and treasure hunter, darting between the old rain barrels and the scattered hay bales near the back pasture. Her boots kicked up dust with every leap. Her laughter, light and free, danced through the air. Behind her, as always, the dogs followed at a respectful distance, alert but calm. They didn't interrupt her imagination. They just watched. Her mother stood by the kitchen sink, drying a dish with a frayed towel, gaze drifting absent-mindedly toward the backyard. It was instinct by now, watching her daughter from the window, just in case. But ever since the dogs arrived, that instinct had grown quiet, almost, until she saw where Aurora was headed. Just beyond the fence line, where the grass grew taller and the air grew quieter, began the edge of the woods. Dense, old woods, the kind no one walked through after dusk. Even the deer seemed to avoid it. That stretch had always held a kind of silence that didn't feel natural, like the forest was holding its breath. Aurora didn't seem to notice. Her eyes were locked on something in the grass, maybe a pine cone, maybe just a story waiting to be told. She ducked under the split-rail fence. Then, Night moved. From a distance, it looked like nothing a dog rising to follow a child. But there was urgency in the way his body shifted, a fluid motion like a switch had been flipped. He moved faster than usual, not bounding, not barking positioning. He stepped directly into Aurora's path and stopped, blocking her with his full body. She bumped into him lightly, startled. "Hey, what is it?" Night didn't growl, didn't move. He just stood there, eyes fixed on the tree line ahead, ears locked forward, muscles tense. Aurora tried to peer around him, confused. Then she noticed the others, Luna and Ash, flanking the rear, Bear low to the ground, nose twitching. Her mom was already out the back door by then, towel forgotten, bare feet slapping the porch boards. "Aurora!" she called. Her voice carried sharp this time. The little girl turned. Come back now." Aurora hesitated, but Night didn't. He stepped closer, nudging her gently but firmly away from the woods. Not scared, not aggressive, just insistent. As if he knew something she didn't, Aurora turned and walked back toward the yard, and the dogs followed in tight formation. Her mother met them halfway, trying to mask the tremble in her voice with a smile. "Let's stay a little closer to the barn next time, sweetheart." Aurora nodded. "I think Night didn't like the woods." Her mother forced a chuckle. Maybe he saw a squirrel, but in her chest, the unease had bloomed again. The kind that didn't come from what she saw, but from what she hadn't. That night, the wind returned. Not wild, but purposeful. A steady hush that brushed against the windows like fingertips testing for weakness. The house was dark, save for the nightlight in Aurora's room, a soft yellow glow in the corner shaped like a moon. She slept with one hand tucked under her cheek, the other loosely curled in a blanket that had once belonged to her father. The clock read 2:11 a.m. when it happened. A sound outside, not thunder, not an animal. A footstep, slow, deliberate, crunching gravel, then silence. Aurora stirred, but didn't wake. Downstairs, her parents lay side by side, eyes open, breath held. Her father sat up, pulling back the curtain just a sliver. Nothing. But then again a creak on the porch, like weight shifting on old wood. He rose silently, feet bare on cold tile, and moved toward the door. The dogs hadn't barked. Not yet. He reached for the porch light switch, but just before his fingers touched it, a low growl. Not from the house, from the dark beyond the glass. The kind of growl that doesn't ask questions. The kind that warns once, then silence again. He didn't turn on the light, didn't open the door. He just waited, and out there in the dark, something else did too. Morning came soft and gray. Aurora bounded down the stairs with bedhead and morning breath, still half dreaming. But the moment she stepped onto the porch, she paused. All 4 dogs were standing, not lying facing the woods. They had stayed up all night, watching. She sat beside Night and leaned against him, tiny hand resting on his thick coat. "I heard something last night," she whispered. Night didn't blink, didn't move, but she felt it, that same pressure in her chest. Not fear. A warning. Something had been near. And they weren't done. Yet. The morning light spilled slow and golden across the fields, touching the tops of the corn stalks and stretching its warmth over the faded red shed near the back of the property. It was Aurora's favorite place to play, the little shed with peeling paint and rusted hinges, where old tools hung like ancient relics and the dust smelled like stories waiting to be told. She was helping her father refill the feed bins, her small hands gripping the edge of the galvanized bucket as she tiptoed across the uneven ground. The grass there grew tall and wild left to its own rulesits, blades brushing against her knees as she made her way toward the back door of the shed. The dogs were close, as always. Bear was ahead, sniffing near the wheelbarrow. Luna lingered by the fence, head low, alert. Night stood guard in the open space, watching everything at once. Ash quiet, unreadable Ash was the one nearest to her. He followed at her left side, pacing like a shadow that had weight. Aurora turned to adjust her grip on the bucket, and that's when she lost it. The metal handle slipped from her hand, and the bucket fell with a clattering thud. grain scattering across the grass like tiny gold marbles. She gasped and dropped to her knees, reaching to gather it back. That's when she heard it, a hiss. Sharp, wet, primal. Time folded into itself in that instant, before she could scream, before she could understand. There was a blur of motion beside her. A low snarl erupted like a warning shot, and then Ash lunged. Not at her, past her. He placed his body between her and the source of the sound head, low, teeth bared, eyes locked, and there it was. A rattlesnake, coiled beneath the shed's shadow, inches from where Aurora had reached, its tail vibrating like a live wire, fangs glistening in the morning sun. Aurora froze. Her breath hitched. She hadn't seen it. She would have touched it. The snake swayed back and forth, sensing threat, but it wasn't facing her anymore. It was facing Ash. And Ash, he didn't growl again. He didn't bark. He just stood there, unwavering, the way a trained protector holds a line. The hairs along his spine stood up, but he made no move to attack, only defend. The moment stretched taut. Then the snake did something strange. It hesitated, sensing perhaps what Aurora already felt. This wasn't just a dog. This was a wall it would not pass. After several long seconds, the rattlesnake turned, slithered through the grass, and disappeared into the brush beyond the shed. Ash didn't move until the last of its tail vanished into shadow. Then he looked over his shoulder at Aurora, not proud, not boastful, just checking. Was she okay? Aurora blinked hard, as if coming out of a dream. Her hands trembled slightly, one still clutching a fistful of grain. She let it fall. Ash, she whispered. And then, before she even realized what she was doing, she reached out and wrapped her arms around his thick neck, burying her face in his fur. Her father had heard the bucket drop and was already halfway across the yard when he saw Itha's daughter crouched in the grass, arms wrapped around a dog who was standing like a soldier in the aftermath of a war. He didn't yell. He didn't ask what happened, because he saw it in her face and in Ash's posture. The tension still coiled in his body, the dust in the air not yet settled. What happened? Her mother asked from the porch, heart already in her throat. Her father lifted a hand. Snake, a sharp intake of breath. Is she? She's fine, he said. Then, almost in disbelief, because of him. They watched as Aurora stood up slowly, brushing her palms on her jeans. Ash remained by her side, eyes still sweeping the grass, just in case. Did he bark? Her mother asked. Number he didn't need to. Her father stepped forward and knelt beside Ash, running a calloused hand along the dog's shoulder. That wasn't instinct, he murmured. That was training. That evening, Aurora sat between Night and Ash on the back porch, her legs swinging off the edge, scuffed knees swaying above the steps. The sun dipped behind the hills, staining the sky in soft fire. She said nothing for a long time. Then, without turning, she spoke. He knew, before I even saw it. Her mother stood in the doorway, arms folded, heart still trying to slow down from that morning. They're not just protecting her, she whispered to her husband. They're assigned to her. He didn't argue, because deep down he had already accepted it. These weren't strays. These were guardians, sentinels, and someone had sent them for a reason. The wind came in whispers that night, slipping under door frames, curling through tree branches like fingers searching for a handle. The stars above the Thompson farm blinked behind drifting clouds, and the barn sat quiet beneath them, solid and still like it had for nearly 100 years. Aurora lay curled in her blankets, hair tangled across her pillow, one arm wrapped tightly around her stuffed rabbit. The moonlight stretched through the curtains in silver bars, painting the wooden floor like a quiet prison of light. She stirred. Eyes fluttered open, not from a dream, but from a sound. At first, she thought it was part of her imagination, a muffled echo from something she'd heard in a dream and carried into the waking world. But as she held her breath and listened, she heard it again. A bark, low, measured, intentional, not frantic, not playful, and definitely not Rusty. Her brow furrowed. Rusty, their aging retriever, hadn't barked like that in years, and when he did, it was always the same half-hearted woof from his belly, tired and friendly. But this bark, it was different. Sharper, focused, controlled. Aurora slipped from bed, tiptoeing across the cold floor and drawing back the curtain. Her window overlooked the backyard and part of the barn, just barely lit by the motion sensor light over the porch. Nothing moved. She pressed her palm to the glass, listening harder. Silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty, just heavy, like something had just passed through and the world hadn't decided whether to acknowledge it or not. Then came another bark, farther away, now muffled by trees or distance, but still clear, still deliberate. She squinted toward the edge of the property, where the field met the start of the woods, but there was only dark. After a long moment, she backed away, climbed back into bed, and pulled the blankets to her chin. Her heart was beating faster than she wanted to admit. She didn't sleep for a while. The next morning, over toast and scrambled eggs, she pushed her fork around the plate, eyes unfocused. "Did anyone else hear barking last night?" she asked quietly. Her mom looked up from her coffee. "Rusty? Number." "It wasn't him." She paused. "It didn't sound like him." Her dad glanced toward the back door, then shrugged. "Could have been coyotes. They pass through sometimes, especially this time of year." It wasn't wild," Aurora said firmly. "It didn't sound wild." Her mother offered a soft smile. "Maybe you were dreaming, sweetheart. You've been thinking about the dogs a lot lately." Aurora didn't answer, not because she believed them, but because she didn't want to say what she really thought. It sounded like one of them, but not one of hers. Later that day, they drove down the gravel road to visit their nearest neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Mathis, who lived 3 properties down and owned a small dairy operation. The cows were always out near the fence, and the Mathises were the kind of people who noticed things. Aurora asked as casually as she could, "Have you seen any dogs lately? Strays? Barking at night?" Mr. Mathis shook his head. "Nothing unusual. Our shepherd would have raised hell if something was near the fence." His wife chimed in, "We haven't had any strays in months. Did you lose one?" Aurora's dad stepped in before she could answer. "Just checking. Thought we heard something strange. Probably coyotes," Mr. Mathis said with a nod. "They sound like they're laughing when they get excited. Easy to mistake." But it hadn't sounded like laughter. It had sounded like a signal. That night, Aurora stood at her window again, forehead resting against the cool glass. The barn lights had already clicked off. The fields were dark, and the woods behind them looked endless. Her 4 dogs were lying in the grass just past the porch, barely visible in the low light, but she could tell them apart by shape now. Night sat up, ears forward, watching the same spot she was. "The edge of the woods," she whispered to herself. "You heard it too, didn't you?" Night didn't move, didn't turn, just stared into the dark. And in her chest, that same quiet pull returned, not fear, not yet, but the sense that something was approaching, something that didn't belong. The morning sun had barely crested the hills when Aurora's father stepped onto the porch, coffee steaming in one hand, the other rubbing sleep from his eyes. The grass was still wet with dew, glittering underfoot like spilled salt. He took a long breath of crisp autumn air and scanned the yard like he always did. Chickens safe, Rusty asleep near the gate, and the barn. He froze. The barn door was ajar. Not wide open, but not shut either, hanging crooked, as if nudged from within or pulled from outside by someone who didn't care to be quiet. He blinked once. Twice. The night before he had locked it, with a padlock. He remembered the distinct click, the deliberate tug on the latch to double-check. He lowered his coffee without taking a sip. "Aurora," he called over his shoulder, not loud-measured. "Stay inside for now, all right?" Inside, she paused mid-step on the stairs, one socked foot hovering in the air. She heard it in his tone and not panic, but the kind of sharpness he usually reserved for broken fence lines or loose animals. Something wasn't right. He approached the barn slowly. The dogs were already there. Knight stood motionless near the corner, staring at the door. Ash was pacing in a half-circle near the side wall, nose low to the ground. Bear let out a low, uncertain whine more, confused, then alarmed. Luna sat near the fence line, ears trained forward like radar, tail flat and still. The padlock was missing, no sign of it on the ground. Just the dangling clasp, metal scraped as if forced open. He reached for the handle and pushed the door open cautiously. It groaned on its hinges, familiar, but heavier today. Sunlight filtered through the high slats in hazy beams. Dust floated in the air, disturbed. And then he saw it. Boot prints. Subtle, but fresh. Pressed into the layer of straw and dirt just inside the doorway, heading toward the back wall and looping once near the feed barrels before disappearing into scattered hay. The tread was different from his narrower, deeper at the heel. Not work boots. Tactical. He knelt beside one, fingers hovering over the indentation. Someone had been inside. Recently. Maybe hours ago. Maybe while they slept. He stood slowly and scanned the barn. Nothing missing. Nothing out of place, except the lock and the feeling that someone had been in a space that didn't belong to them. He backed out and closed the door, latching it again with a quiet clack of metal. This time, he didn't bother with the old padlock. He brought out his toolbox and installed a new one, thicker, heavier, high quality, one with a number code, not a key. As he tightened the final bolt, Aurora appeared behind him, hugging her sweater to her chest. Did something happen? He turned to her, pausing before he spoke. The lock was gone, he said simply. Someone's been in here. Her eyes widened. But the dogs, I don't think they were here when it happened. She looked to Knight, who was now sitting just beyond the porch, tail curled around his paws, face unreadable, always watching. Do you think they know who did it? I think they'd tell us if they could. She bent down and picked up something in the grass half buried near the barn's foundation. A single black zip tie, clean and unused. Her father took it from her gently, turned it over in his hand. Industrial grade. Not something you'd find lying around a farm. He looked toward the tree line. The wind pushed through the pines, the top swaying slightly, like something shifting beneath the surface of a pond. This wasn't random. That night, after dinner, Aurora sat by the living room window, legs tucked under her blanket, eyes scanning the dark. The barn was locked. The house was locked. But her heart wouldn't settle. There were footprints, she said aloud. Her mother looked up from the couch. They weren't ours, Aurora whispered. Her mom didn't answer right away. Then, I know. And in the next breath, quieter still. They're not just following you, Aurora. They're guarding something. Aurora looked outside at the four shadows lying motionless in the yard. No, she murmured. They're guarding me. It was the kind of conversation that began like any other an old man, a coffee mug, and a morning routine too slow for the world around him. Mr. Harold lived 2 properties down, his cabin tucked between a patch of withered cottonwoods and a weathered picket fence that had long stopped keeping anything in or out. His memory flickered like a porch light, with bad wiring dim in places, but bright in moments that mattered. That morning, as Aurora and her father delivered fresh egg-spart kindness, part habit they stood on his sun-faded porch while he leaned against the railing, whittling a block of pine with a pocket knife so dull it was more suggestion than tool. He gestured lazily toward the ridge behind the McAllister barn. You folks had some company the other night, he said, as casually as one might comment on the weather. Aurora's father paused. What do you mean? Mr. Harold squinted toward the tree line. 3 nights ago, maybe 4, round 2 in the morning. Woke up because my arthritis was howling again. Saw headlights through the east trees. Black van. Parked right at the edge of your lot. Aurora felt her chest tighten. Did you see anyone get out? Her father asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Mr. Harold shook his head. Nope. Stayed there for maybe 10, 15 minutes. Engine running. No lights. Then it pulled out slow, like it didn't want anyone noticing. He looked at Aurora then, something sharp flickering behind his cloudy eyes. I thought it was a delivery or something. But now that you're here asking about it, her father's jaw clenched just slightly. Thanks for telling us, Harold, the old man shrugged. Didn't think much of it. But a black van sitting still at 2 a.m.? That's not a good kind of still. On the way back to the house, Aurora said nothing for several paces. Then softly, they weren't lost. Her father glanced at her. They were dropped here. Her voice cracked on the last word. It wasn't fear, it was realization. Like something just clicked into place. Like a puzzle piece had been hovering above her for days, and now it had fallen straight into the center. Night, Ash, Luna, Bear. They didn't arrive by chance. They hadn't wandered miles through forest and pasture like aimless strays. They were placed here, chosen, left. She looked back toward the Barntha place where boot prints had whispered their warning. Her stomach twisted. They're not just protecting us. she whispered. They're hiding. Her father stopped walking. What do you mean? Aurora looked up at him. I don't think they ran away, she said. I think they were released, or smuggled, or escaped. But they didn't just stumble onto our land. Her father didn't answer, but she could see it working in his mind. The scratches on the barn door, the missing padlock, the zip tie, the black van. 4 dogs trained to protect without being told. 4 dogs who never barked without a reason. It was adding up, and the sum was worry. That evening, Aurora sat on the porch steps, knees pulled to her chest. The sky was fading from lavender to navy, clouds sinking low like bruises across the horizon. The air smelled of dry leaves and storm warnings. The dogs were nearby always. Knight sat upright, perfectly still at the edge of the yard, eyes scanning the dusk like a sentinel who had seen too much war to ever rest. Luna lay beside the porch, ears twitching at every sound. Ash and Bear circled slowly near the fence. Silent, deliberate. Who left you? Aurora murmured. And why here? She remembered Luna's eyes the first night. Not pleading, not afraid, just waiting. She hadn't known what for then. But now she wondered if it had been her all along. That night, Aurora woke with a start. A sound again. Distant, low, barely audible through the wind rattling the window panes. But it wasn't barking this time. It was an engine, far enough not to see, close enough to hear it ling. She slipped out of bed and tiptoed to the window, parting the curtain with trembling fingers. The field beyond the barn was shrouded in fog and night, but for a split second, she saw it. A glint of headlights behind the trees, then nothing. She stayed there, frozen, breath fogging the glass. And below her window, in the dark, Knight was already standing, facing the woods, tail low, still as stone. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and wet for comforting and clinical, a place where worry always waited in the corner. Aurora sat cross-legged on the cool tile floor, one hand resting gently on Luna's back, the other twirling a loose thread from her sleeve. Beside her, Bear panted softly, tail thumping once every few seconds against the floor. Knight sat rigid by the door, always watching, always between Aurora and the exit. Ash stood near the front desk, his head turning at every creak, every whisper of movement. No leash held him there, just something older than training, something bone deep. Dr. Albright had agreed to see them last minute. A favor, really. She'd known the family since Aurora was born, had treated Rusty for allergies, and once pulled a nail from the hoof of their stubborn mule. But this was different. 4 strays, no collars, strange temperaments, unusual silence, and a look in their eyes that made even seasoned dog owners hesitate before reaching out. The exam room was too small for all of them. Dr. Albright chuckled nervously as she stepped around Knight. Never thought I'd be doing a wellness check on what looks like a private security team. Aurora's dad smiled thinly, his arms crossed over his chest. They just showed up one night. We thought we should make sure they're okay. Dr. Albright nodded and adjusted her glasses. They seem well cared for. Not wild, that's for sure. Let's see what we're working with. She started with Luna, the gentlest of the 4. Aurora helped her up onto the table, murmuring soothing words as Dr. Albright ran practiced hands along her ribs and paws, checked her eyes and teeth, her heartbeat steady and slow. Well fed, no parasites, no injuries, and the coat this is not a stray's coat. Someone brushed her regularly. She picked up a small scanner and hovered it over Luna's shoulder. A soft beep. Dr. Albright froze. She looked at the reader, then back at them. She's chipped. Aurora blinked. What? The vet frowned, tapping the screen. Microchipped. But it's weird. The serial doesn't look like a standard registry number. It's not logging into any of the usual databases. What does that mean? Her mother asked, stepping closer. It means this isn't a chip from any pet registry I have access to. Could be private, military, even corporate. Dr. Albright paused, then moved to scan Bear. Beep. Ash. Beep. Knight. Beep. All 4, all chipped, but none registered. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air tighter. Aurora's father shifted, the weight of something unspoken settling behind his eyes. These dogs, Dr. Albright said slowly, weren't dumped. They weren't lost. They were erased. Aurora didn't understand the full meaning, but she could feel it the way the dogs grew still, the way even Luna's ears tilted slightly back. Like they knew. Like they had always known. "What do you mean erased?" her father asked, voice low. Dr. Albright turned the scanner off, set it gently on the counter. "The chip's there, but it's not linked to any civilian records. No name, no address, just a serial string I can't trace. That doesn't happen by accident. It's like someone didn't want them to exist on paper." She looked at Knight then, her voice softer. These dogs were part of something. The ride home was silent. Knight sat in the back of the truck bed, facing the road behind them, wind tugging gently at the scars, just below his collarbone. Luna lay curled next to Aurora, head in her lap, body trembling ever so slightly as if the scanner had stirred something buried. Aurora stroked her ears, her voice a hush. "You were never just dogs, were you?" No answer. Only the wind. Only the knowledge that whoever had chipped them had once owned them might come looking. And that maybe, just maybe, the dogs weren't just guarding the family. They were guarding something inside themselves. The low hum of the fluorescent lights in the vet's office was the only sound as Dr. Albright stared at the screen, her fingers hovering above the keyboard as if afraid to touch it again. She had scanned all 4 dogs twice. Knight, Ash, Bear, Luna. All of them triggered the same soft beep from the handheld chip reader. All of them returned codes. But none of them matched anything in her system. "They're microchipped, yes," she murmured almost to herself. "But these aren't pet registry chips. Not Home Again, not AKC, not even the regional shelters." Aurora's dad stood behind her, arms crossed tightly, tension riding his shoulders. Could they be old? Or out of state? Albright shook her head, her face suddenly serious. "Not likely. Even the outdated ones would still ping a manufacturer. These," she tapped the screen, squinting, "these are scrambled." She moved to her laptop, pulled open a different program, something buried deeper in her files, typically used only when police dogs came in after accidents. The login prompt blinked for a second before unlocking a private database. She typed in the first alphanumeric sequence from Knight's scan. "Access denied." She frowned. "Tried Luna's chip. Access denied." She tried again, this time routing it through an encrypted vet-only network with federal links, usually reserved for stolen animals, bite history, or high-risk breed identification. The moment she hit enter after Ash's code, her screen froze. A small black dialog box popped up, no icons, no logos, just a line of white text. "Restricted entry. Military use only. Access unauthorized. This attempt will be logged." Dr. Albright's face went pale. She slowly leaned back in her chair, hands off the keyboard like she'd touched something radioactive. Aurora's mother stepped forward, voice tight. "What did that say?" Dr. Albright didn't look at her. She looked at the dogs. Ash was still as stone. Knight had risen slightly to his feet, body not tense but alert, watching, reading the room like he'd done it before. Dr. Albright swallowed. "These aren't regular chips. They're encrypted, layered encryption, with dynamic masking military grade. Not even some law enforcement units get this kind of clearance." She turned toward the family now, her voice low, careful. "Your dogs. They belong to someone who wanted them off the map. Someone with access to federal-level tech." Aurora's breath caught. Her fingers curled in Luna's fur. Her dad stepped forward, still trying to keep logic in his voice. "Could they be ex-K9S? Retired or dumped?" Dr. Albright hesitated. "I've seen K9 chips. I've treated dozens of former working dogs. They're always logged even, if only partially. These look like someone deliberately wiped their trail, but didn't remove the chips." Aurora asked the question that no one else dared. Why would someone do that? The vet met her eyes for a long moment. "I don't know, but it usually means one of 2 things. Either the dogs ran from something, or someone let them goon purpose." Silence. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the weathered sign above the clinic door. In the background, the computer continued to hum, as if it too was holding its breath. Knight stepped forward, placing himself between Aurora and the vet without sound, without tension, just quiet presence. Her father reached instinctively for his daughter, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "These dogs, they didn't just find us," he murmured. "They were meant to. Dr. Albright nodded once, still pale. I think whoever trained them didn't expect them to survive. Or worse, didn't want them to. The house was unusually quiet that night. No television, no laughter, no sound of Aurora strumming her guitar upstairs. Just the rustle of wind through dry branches outside, and the low rhythmic thump of Knight's tail on the hardwood floor whenever Aurora passed by. Her father sat hunched at the dining table, laptop open, face lit by the dim screen. His knuckles were pale against his coffee mug. Her mother stood behind him, one hand pressed over her mouth, the other clutching the back of his chair like an anchor in rough water. He clicked another link, scrolled, then stopped. Halberd Solutions, he muttered. That's what the chip metadata traces back to. Aurora leaned over the table, her eyes wide. Who are they? Her dad didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned the screen so they could all see. A headline glared at them in stark white font. Private military contractor under fire for bioethics violations. Halberd Solutions accused of animal cruelty, black site experimentation, and illegal enhancement protocols. Beneath it was a photogranny taken from a drone, a barren training compound in the middle of the desert. Dozens of kennels lined up like shipping containers, shadows pacing inside them. Aurora felt her stomach drop. Her mom slowly sat down next to her. They trained dogs? She asked quietly. Her husband nodded. Not just trained them, they used them for military ops, overseas, covert actions where deniability was more important than care. He scrolled further. More headlines. Whistleblower reveals Halberd's canine neural augmentation tests. Congress investigates missing dogs after Halberd shutdown. Hundreds of canines unaccounted for, families never notified. Her mom whispered, "Dear God." The screen flickered again in embedded video. Muted. A woman in a suit addressing the press. We believe at least 16 dogs were untraceable after the shutdown. We suspect they were either put down without proper documentation or abandoned somewhere in the Southwest. Aurora stepped back from the screen as if it had burned her. Bear, sleeping under the window, stirred at the shift in her breathing. Ash sat up, his eyes alert. Knight never moved, but his ears twitched. Her father turned toward them slowly, the weight of the truth heavy on his shoulders. They weren't strays, he said. They were discarded. Her mother looked at her daughter, then at the dogs. Her voice trembled. We were never meant to have them. Aurora's jaw tightened. Her hand reached out, resting on Luna's head. Luna leaned into it like a reflex. As if that moment, that contact, mattered more than any history hidden in a chip. Aurora shook her head. Number. Maybe we weren't meant to, but they came anyway. The house felt colder than usual that night, despite the summer heat still clinging to the windows. Somewhere down the hallway, the floor creaked under the weight of hesitation. Aurora sat on the stairs, hidden in shadow, her knees pulled to her chest. She clutched her notebook, but hadn't written in it all day. Her ears strained toward the kitchen, where the low murmur of her parents' voices slipped through the silence like a draft through a cracked door. They're military property, James, her mother whispered. Government, this could be dangerous. Her father's voice, tight and trembling. Number. They're not property. Not anymore. They were abandoned. Like trash. But if we get caught hiding them. We're not hiding them, he snapped, quieter than his frustration deserved. They came here, on their own. Aurora felt Knight stir behind her. He was always close now, like a shadow stitched to her heels. The other three were asleep, limbs tangled at the base of the stairs, but Knight sat halfway up, still as stone, as if he too was listening. Her mother's voice broke. And what if someone comes looking? What if Halberd had enemies? What if they saved her life? Her father interrupted, almost pleading. That rattlesnake would have killed her, and we never would have known what happened until it was too late. A pause, then softer, like a confession. And it wasn't just the snake. That night she wandered near the woods night, blocked her path. He knew something was out there. They've been watching, guarding, like they were trained to, but not for war. For her, another silence. The kind that aches. Aurora held her breath. Then her mom said it, the thing neither of them had wanted to voice. Do we report this? Footsteps shifted. A chair creaked. "No," her dad finally whispered. "Not yet." "But James, I won't let some bureaucrat take them back to a lab or a cage or a death row kennel. If these dogs were experiments, they paid their price already. We owe them something better." His voice trembled now. "We owe them dignity." Aurora swallowed hard. From where she sat, she couldn't see them, but she could picture it. Her mother's furrowed brow, her dad's clenched fists. The question stretched like wire between them. She heard a soft sniff. Her mom. "They're just dogs," she whispered, but the words rang hollow in the air. Aurora turned her head slightly and met Knight's eyes in the dark. Number. They weren't just anything. They were ghosts of a forgotten war, guardians that hadn't forgotten their mission. And somehow, they had chosen her. The moon hung low over the barn roof, pale and watchful, casting a silver veil across the fields. The world was hushed, the kind of hush that makes even insects hold their breath. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried into the emptiness. But here, within the fence line, all was still. Aurora slipped out barefoot. She didn't wear a jacket. The air was cool, but she welcomed the cold. It made her feel awake, anchored. Her footsteps were soft in the dew-damp grass, and her nightgown clung slightly at the hem. In her hand, she held a half-finished drawing crumpled, forgotten until now. She knew exactly where he'd be. Knight sat at the edge of the yard, where the porch light dissolved into dark, just beyond the reach of comfort. His silhouette was unmoving, almost carved into the earth, like a stone sentinel left behind by some ancient world. Aurora approached slowly, as if stepping into sacred space. He didn't turn. He'd heard her coming long before she stepped outside. He always did. She eased down beside him, knees drawn up, arms wrapped loosely around her legs. She didn't say anything at first, just sat, listened, watched the horizon the way he did. He smelled like the woods and the barn hay, and something older like rain on rusted steel. Minutes passed like pages turning in a book with no words. Then her hand reached out. Fingers gently touched the thick fur behind his ear. He let her. No shift, no flinch, just that deep, steady breath of trust. And finally, she whispered into the quiet. "You don't have to go. I want you here." Her voice cracked a little on want. She hadn't meant to cry, but the tears came anyway, silent and warm against the cold of her cheeks. Knight turned his head slightly, brushing his muzzle against her shoulder. A weightless gesture, but it grounded her more than anything else in the world. She didn't know what Halberd Solutions was. Not really. Didn't understand encrypted chips or military contractors or the word classified. But she understood this, the way Knight had stepped in front of the snake. The way Ash had taken the bite. The way Luna circled the house each night, ears twitching at every snap of twig. The way Bear slept at the foot of her bed, like a living wall. She knew what it meant to feel safe. And she knew what it meant to feel chosen. Knight shifted his weight, then lay down beside her, his side pressing against hers. His breath was slow and deep. The air between them warmed. Aurora leaned into him, resting her head gently on his shoulder. "They don't know what to do with you," she murmured. "But I do." The wind tugged at the grass around them, as if listening. "You're not just soldiers," she added, her voice steadier now. "You're something else." And Knight didn't move, but his ear flicked, and his tail gave a slow, deliberate thump against the ground. Aurora smiled through her tears. "You came to us for a reason. I don't know what it is yet, but I think I was supposed to find you." She closed her eyes, and there, beneath the moon and the weight of too many secrets, a girl and her guardian sat folded into the night no words left between them, and none needed. The world was broken, but here, for this 1 hour, under this sky, something held, something healed. The house had gone quiet again, not the silence of sleep, but of waiting, of hearts pacing behind ribs. The kind of silence you notice only when everything else is too loud to speak. From the living room window, Daniel stood in shadow, unmoving. He didn't need the lights on. His eyes had already adjusted to the patterns of the night. The swing set at the edge of the yard, the shed, the low fence, and beyond, Thathis' daughter, sitting beside a creature bred for war, wrapped in the stillness of moonlight. His hand rested against the glass. Not clenched, just still. Fingers slightly splayed, a gesture between bracing and surrender. Behind him, Marion lingered in the hallway, barefoot, arms crossed against her chest, her cardigan thrown on like armor against an invisible cold. She didn't speak, just waited. They had argued early quiet but intense, voices like flint in a dry barn, not out of anger, but out of fear. The kind that speaks in unfinished sentences, the kind that asks, what are we responsible for? Who are we protecting? And what happens if we're wrong? Outside, Aurora whispered something neither of them could hear, but the way Knight responded, gentle, deliberate, leaning in like he understood made something inside Daniel shift. Not crack, not shatter, just shift. A click behind the ribs, a long breath drawn from somewhere deeper than the lungs. He turned slightly toward Marion. They chose us, he said softly. Not a theory, a knowing. Maybe for a reason. She stared at him, eyes unreadable, then walked slowly over and stood beside him. They watched together. Watched the girl who had never quite fit in anywhere curl against a beast that the world would call dangerous. Watched how that same beast bowed its head in a gesture more sacred than prayer. And for the first time since the vet visit, neither of them spoke of calling anyone. Not the sheriff. Not animal control. Not whatever black badge division would come storming in if they whispered the word halberd. Because something didn't make sense, but something else did. A girl who once needed nightlights now walked freely in the dark. A father who'd sworn he'd keep his daughter safe now watched someone else do it better. And a creature trained for silence now slept with one ear tuned only to her breath. Marion's voice was a whisper barely caught in the air. What do we do? Daniel's hand dropped from the glass. He didn't answer right away. Just exhaled slowly, like letting go of something he'd been gripping too long. We wait, he said. We protect them the way they've protected her. Marion's fingers found his. She didn't argue. Outside, Knight lifted his head just once, ears twitching, as if he knew they were being watched. Then he lowered it again, pressing closer to Aurora's side. Whatever darkness was coming, it hadn't reached them yet, but it would. And when it did, they wouldn't face it alone. The dream came quietly, like a fog seeping beneath the door. Aurora stood in the middle of an open field. It was the kind of place that didn't belong anywhere in particular. Gray skies overhead, no horizon in sight, the ground littered with broken collars and rusted chains. Silence pressed down like a weight. Then she saw him. Knight. He was running toward her, limping, blood trailing behind like ink spilled across paper. His eyes locked on hers wild, pleading. Not with fear, but with urgency. Aurora! She tried to scream, but no sound left her mouth. Her feet wouldn't move. The air around her was thick as syrup. From behind, floodlights exploded across the field. Men in black uniforms surged forward. No faces, just visors and boots and hands that didn't hesitate. Knight skidded to a halt, spun around, teeth bared. No! She finally managed to cry out, her voice cracking. It was too late. A net flew. A stun baton lit blue. Then came the cage. They dragged him, clawing and howling, across the dirt. His eyes never left hers. Bleeding. Trapped. Silenced. And then she woke. Gasping. Sheets twisted around her legs like restraints. Sweat soaked through her back. Tears she hadn't realized were falling now dripped off her chin. It was still dark, but not silent. From outside, just beyond the thin walls of her room, howls pierced the night. Long, low, mourning. They rose not in chaos, but in rhythm, as if echoing a memory that hadn't happened yet. She scrambled to the window, heart pounding, throat dry. There they were, all 4 dogs, standing alert in the yard, eyes fixed on the tree line, ears up. Knight stood slightly ahead of the others, his body taut, tail stiff, not growling, not barking, just listening. Aurora pressed her palm to the glass. I saw them take you, she whispered, her voice still hoarse with sleep. I saw it. Knight turned his head slightly, as if he'd heard her across the pane. His eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, met hers. And in that moment, she knew it hadn't just been a dream. It was a warning. The next morning, the kitchen was quiet, save for the occasional clink of a spoon against ceramic. Aurora sat at the table, poking absent-mindedly at a bowl of cereal gone soggy. Her eyes drifted to the backyard window. Night lay beneath the oak, unmoving but watching, always watching. Her father hadn't joined them for breakfast. Instead, he was hunched over the old desktop in the den, coffee gone cold beside his elbow. The glow of the screen painted hard lines across his face, deepening with each scroll. He hadn't said much after Aurora's nightmare, but she'd seen the way he looked at night, afterward no longer like a stray dog, more like a soldier standing guard. He typed, paused, deleted, typed again. Military canine chip encryption, private registry bypass, government contract records. Most links led to dead ends, paywalls, scrubbed pages. A few redirected to vague articles about security firms, restructuring, or shifting overseas. But then he found something. It wasn't in a database. It was hidden in a cached news article, buried beneath layers of links. Private military firm Halberd Solutions under federal investigation. Date: 18 months ago. His breath caught. He clicked. The article was short, too short. In a surprise move, federal regulators launched an investigation into Halberd Solutions, a private defense contractor known for drone technology and canine tactical development. While details remain sealed, anonymous sources allege illegal animal testing, experimental behavior modification, and unauthorized operations on U.S. soil. The company has ceased operations. Several high-level employees are unaccounted for. That was it. No follow-up stories, no lawsuits filed, no arrests made. Just silence. He leaned back, rubbing his hands over his face. The dots were beginning to connect, and what they outlined terrified him. The encrypted chips, the behavior of the dogs, the dream Aurora had, the van, the barn door. These weren't discarded pets. They were assets, ones someone hadn't meant to lose, or for them to find. "Aurora," he called softly, stepping out of the den. "Where's your mom?" "She's upstairs," Aurora said, barely audible, her gaze still fixed on Night. "What did you find?" He hesitated, then sat beside her and gently placed a printed page on the table. She read the headline. Her fingers trembled a little. Her voice came out like a whisper. "They did things to them, didn't they?" He nodded. "Yeah, things no one should do to anything that breathes." Outside, the wind stirred. The dogs shifted. And inside, Aurora's father reached a quiet conclusion. They weren't just keeping dogs. They were keeping secrets. And secrets never stay buried for long. The sun dipped behind the tree line in bruised shades of violet and rust, casting the farmhouse in a hush that felt thicker than usual. Night had always come softly, here gentle, slow, predictable. But not tonight. Aurora sat curled on the living room couch, blanket drawn to her chin, a half-read book slipping from her lap. Her parents spoke in low voices in the kitchen, pretending everything was fine, pretending the air didn't feel like it had teeth. Outside, the dogs were restless. Bear paced by the porch steps. Ash circled the shed twice, tail stiff. Night stood at the edge of the backyard still as stone, facing the woods. Then Luna growled. Not a bark, not a yelp. A low, guttural warning that rumbled from her chest like a storm building beneath the earth. It was the first sound she had made since arriving sharp, primal, laced with something unmistakable. Fear. Aurora sat bolt upright, her eyes snapped to the window. At first, she saw nothing. Just blackness between the trunks. But then there, a flicker. A flashlight beam, thin and careful, weaving through the trees. Not the wild sweep of a camper, not the bouncing wobble of a hiker. Deliberate, measured, searching. Aurora's breath caught. She backed away from the window, her blanket trailing behind her like a second skin. She looked to Luna, who hadn't moved ears forward, hackles raised, eyes locked on the dark. "They're coming back for them," Aurora whispered. No one replied, because somehow everyone already knew. Her father turned off the kitchen light. Her mother drew the curtains. Night growled low and moved toward the front steps. John Thompson felt at first an instinctive prickle at the nape of his neck, the same feeling that made him yank his daughter out of the road when a truck crested the hill too fast, or double-lock the barn the night the dogs first appeared. Out on the porch, He paused mid-step and lifted his head like a watchtower scanning for smoke. The air smelled different, too. A copper-tinged chill, as if metal filings drifted on the breeze. Inside the house, Marion was stacking dishes but froze when she noticed his silhouette rigid behind the screen door. She dried her hands on a dish towel and stepped closer. "What is it?" "Winds turned," he murmured, eyes narrowing toward the dark ribbon of pines that framed the back pasture. Marion wrapped the towel around her forearms, more for reassurance than warmth. She followed his gaze. Nothing moved except the sway of branches, slow and hypnotic. Yet the night felt charged, like a current waiting for a grounding wire. Crack. A twig snapped beyond the garden fence. Both of them jumped. The sound was subtle, nearly swallowed by the wind, but it vibrated through the quiet like a pin dropped in a cathedral. Almost simultaneously, the 4 German shepherds stirred. Knight rose first from his sentry post on the porch steps, ears slicing the air. Ash padded from the barn's open doorway, head angled, eyes hard as flint. Luna abandoned her sedate pacing near the chicken coop, settling into a low crouch. Bear lumbered from the side of the house, hackles bristling like storm-charged grass. Marion's breath hitched. "Could be wildlife," she offered, but her voice lacked conviction. John considered retrieving the shotgun from the hall closet, then shook the idea off. A firearm felt almost redundant when 4 living weapons were drawing a silent perimeter. He tightened his grip on the flashlight instead. "I'm gonna walk the fence." Marion's hand shot out, clutching his sleeve. Not alone. He glanced at her, intent warring with worry. Ever since Halbert's secret spilled into daylight, he'd felt stuck between protecting his family and trusting the dogs to do the impossible. Tonight, he sensed he might need both instincts at once. Another sound drifted across the field, a faint metallic jingle, like keys brushing against a belt buckle. It came, then vanished, swallowed by wind. Knight's lips peeled back in a soundless snarl. Luna responded with a sharp bark that ricocheted off the barn wall before she fell quiet again. Muscles coiled. John lifted the porch gate latch, stepping out into the yard. "Knight, with me," he ordered softly. The dog obeyed instantly, shadowing his right leg. Bear lumbered after, but paused at Marion's feet, glancing between her and the dark as if to ask which post he should keep. Marion swallowed and pointed to Aurora's window glowing faintly upstairs. "Stay here, big guy," she whispered. Bear eased down on the doormat, massive chest heaving. Ash ghosted along the fence line ahead of John, silent as smoke. Luna followed, veering wide to sweep the orchard's edge. John's boots thudded over dew-soaked grass, each step releasing tiny clouds of scent the dogs cataloged automatically. The flashlight's beam sliced a wavering white ribbon through the night, but revealed only gusts of leaves swirling like startled birds. Halfway to the tree line, Knight stopped so abruptly John nearly stumbled over him. The shepherd's body went rigid, nostrils flared. John swung the flashlight. A glint flickered between the trees, then disappeared. "Who's out there?" he called, voice steady but carrying a warning edge. The wind answered with a long hiss through pine needles. Behind him, Luna let out a throaty growl that reverberated in John's ribs. Ash's shoulders dipped lower, eyes reflecting shards of moonlight, tail a taut lever. John's heart pounded. Each beat seemed to echo off the darkness. He forced slow breaths, recalling Sheriff Dalton's advice. "Stay calm. Dogs read you quicker than they read anyone else." Knight's ears pivoted left, then right. He emitted a low rumble, vibrating under John's hand. Suddenly, the shepherd bounded forward 6 feet, air snapping at nothing, then turned in a defensive arc, guarding John's flank. John panned the flashlight again, slower this time. That fleeting glimmer returned metal? Eyes? A camera lens? Hard to tell. Adrenaline blurred his focus. For a moment, he imagined Gavin Rhodes back from jail, but no, the trainer was locked up awaiting trial. Still, Halbert had never worked alone. Documents hinted at partners who'd melted into shadows when the company collapsed. Partners who might consider the dog's loose ends and evidence. He clenched the flashlight. "Show yourself." He tried again, voice carrying into the pines. A hush answered then. A sudden rustle of underbrush, hurried footsteps retreating. Knight lunged, but John's command snapped sharp. "Stay!" The dog froze, quivering with readiness. Whoever was out there chose flight over confrontation. Branches swayed, parted, then stilled. Silence cascaded back, thicker than before. Minutes passed before John exhaled the tension, nodding his shoulders. He hunkered, rubbing Knight's scruff. "Good boy. Let's get back." As they retreated, Ash swung behind them, guarding the rear. Luna trailed the far flank, nose skimming ground, tracking the intruder's scent into memory. Marion waited at the porch, relief softening the stiff line of her shoulders when she spotted them. "Anything?" she breathed. "Someone watching," John said. "But they're gone now." She shivered, hugging herself. "Gone isn't the same as safe." "No," he agreed. "But it's enough for tonight." "Oh?" Upstairs, dim lamplight glowed through Aurora's curtains. She was supposed to be asleep, yet John suspected her small silhouette pressed against the glass, feeling the same stir that wrenched him from bed earlier, the sense that the world had pivoted unseen. Inside, he bolted the door and killed the porch light. Darkness enveloped the yard, but he took comfort in it. The dog's senses thrived where human eyes failed. Knight plopped beside the sofa, still alert but tail-thumping once when Aurora patted down the stairs in pajama socks. "Daddy?" she whispered. John crouched and gathered her into a hug, breathing in lavender shampoo and oats from bedtime cookies. "We're okay, Pumpkin." Her gaze drifted to Knight, who stared back with that calm, unanswerable wisdom. "Did he scare them away?" John smiled against her hair. "I'd say they scared whoever it was." He kissed her forehead. "Back to bed. Your guardians have first watch." She nodded, but before turning, laid a gentle hand on Knight's head. "Thank you," she told him, and the dog's eyes softened. Marion led Aurora upstairs. The house settled. Yet outside, the wind changed again, this time softer, almost penitent, as though the threat retreated beyond the hills. John poured 2 fingers of bourbon he rarely touched. He sipped, staring at shadow-painted walls, mind replaying flashes of metal, crushed leaves, twisting pine boughs. They had crossed an invisible line. Maybe that line was as simple as love claimed fiercely against those who exploited it. Maybe it stretched back to labs and cages, forward to courtrooms and cameras. Whatever it was, someone now knew exactly where it lay right here, between 4 dogs and the people who refused to surrender them. Knight chuffed, settling in a sphinx pose. John placed the half-empty glass on the mantel and crouched beside him. "I don't know what's coming," he whispered, fingers threading through thick fur. "But we'll meet it together." Knight pressed his broad head into John's palm, a silent pact. Above them, the house exhaled a creakwood, adjusting to temperature, or perhaps a sigh of trust. John glanced toward the staircase. Marion's footfalls hushed as she returned, blanket draped over her arm. She placed it beside Ash, tucking the edges like a mother with a child. Ash rested his muzzle on it, sighing into its softness. A soldier permitted, at last, small luxuries. Bear snored again louder now, as if daring fear to argue with that contented rumble. Luna curled at the base of the door, eyelids drooping but ears tuned outward. John doused the living room lamp. Moonlight filtered through the window, silvering every surface. He sat on the floor beside his pack-a-man on the invisible line, yet not alone. Outside, the wind kept vigil too, threading through pine needles, carrying whispers away. Somewhere in that sound was a promise. They had stepped back, yes, but so had their guardians. And this time, the line would hold. Minutes passed. Knight's breathing slowed. John's eyes grew heavy. At last, he leaned against the sofa, letting the weight of responsibility share space with the steady pulse of trust in each canine chest. Invisible lines shift, winds change, threats return. But in the brittle stillness of pine needles, under the watch of quiet sentinels, love had drawn its own boundary and no storm would cross it unchallenged. When John finally drifted toward sleep, Knight lifted his head once more, scanning the room, the windows, the dark. Satisfied, he rested his muzzle on John's boot, closed his eyes, and listened to the wind carry the night away. The fog came early that morning low and heavy, curling over the field like a blanket soaked in ghosts. Everything felt muffled, distant, off. At 5:12 a.m., John was already awake. Something had pulled him from sleep, not a dream, but a sound. A faint, metallic clink, sharp and foreign, like steel brushing against steel. He rose from bed slowly, careful not to wake his wife. Pulled on boots, grabbed the heavy flashlight from the hook by the door. The dogs were already stirring. Knight stood by the back door, eyes locked toward the barn. Ash and Bear flanked him, tails rigid. Luna pressed against the window, ears twitching. The clinking came again, closer. John unlatched the door. The cold hit like breath from another world. He stepped outside, boots crunching faintly on frozen grass. The dogs moved with him, silent and sure-fore shadows cutting through the mist like they belonged to it. The barn was just 50 yards out, but the fog made it feel a mile away. Shapes dissolved and reformed. The beam of his flashlight bounced uselessly off the haze. Then crunch. A footstep. Not his, not the dog's. He froze. The dogs didn't. They surged forward in unison, growling low, no longer asking permission. Ash let out a sharp bark. Knight bared his teeth. John swept his flashlight toward the sound. But it was gone. Just hay and frost and emptiness. Except the barn door was open again. A full inch. And the lock? Dangling, broken, its metal twisted like it had been pried with force. John swallowed, his grip tightening on the flashlight. This wasn't just someone looking. This was a message. And whatever it meant, they weren't finished yet. The beam from John's flashlight swept across the barn's interior, catching on the dust hanging thick in the morning air like it was holding its breath. Something moved. Not an animal, not a raccoon or a coyote. This was taller human, a silhouette crouched near the hay bales. For a split second, John's brain denied it, clung to disbelief. Then Knight growled a low, warning rumble that vibrated through the barn floor. The figure stood, black jacket, tactical mask, gloves. He held a small duffel, unzipped, spilling out its contents vials, syringes, a coil of rope, and a pair of wire cutters dulled at the edges from use. The man locked eyes with John, but it wasn't defiance in his stare. It was regret. He dropped the bag, hands raised, palms out. John didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Because the dogs had already encircled the intruder, Knight stood in front, ears flattened, muscles tense like a coiled spring. Ash flanked the left, teeth bared. Luna took the rear, no growl, just that eerie, silent readiness, her body still as stone. Bear didn't make a sound, but his presence was massive, looming, unblinking. The man looked at each dog like he knew them, recognized them. "Easy," he said softly, voice muffled by the mask. "I'm not here to hurt them." "Oh." John stepped closer. Flashlight beam fixed on the intruder's chest. "You broke into my barn," John said. His voice was steady, but his knuckles were white around the flashlight. "I didn't come for your family," the man replied. "I came to bring them back." Ash took a step forward, snarling. The man flinched but didn't run. John's eyes dropped to the contents of the bag. Sedatives, custom-fit muzzles, restraints labeled with barcode tags. "You were going to take them by force," John said, voice low. The man didn't answer. Instead, slowly, deliberately, he removed his mask. He wasn't older than 30. Pale, gaunt, with deep lines around his eyes like someone who hadn't slept in years. There was something behind his gaze, something broken, worn down. "I helped train them," he whispered. "Years ago, before it all went bad." John stared at him. "Halberd Solutions." The man nodded once. "We called this unit Praetor Pack. They weren't just trained, they were made. You have no idea what they've seen." Knight hadn't taken his eyes off the man, but his tail didn't move. Not a twitch, not a sign of familiarity, just focus. "They escaped?" John asked. "Not exactly." The man looked down. "They were released, loosed, because we thought no one would believe what they really were. We thought they'd just disappear in the wild. But they didn't," John said. The man's voice broke slightly. They found something better." He looked toward the open door where morning light bled through the fog. "They found a home." And for the first time, the man didn't look like an intruder. He looked like a witness. Or maybe someone running from his own ghosts. Red and blue strobes carved through the fog, like lightning that refused to fade. Tires crackled over gravel as 3 cruisers rolled onto the Thompson property, headlights spearing the half-lit dawn. Deputy radios hissed with clipped instructions. Doors slammed. Boots hit earth in choreographed urgency. Inside the barn, John kept the flashlight trained on the intruder's chest, While the dogs held their silent perimeter, Knight didn't so much as twitchers forward, a statue of contained ferocity. Yet the muscles in his shoulders told any onlooker how quickly that stillness could break. Sheriff Dalton entered first broad-shouldered, silver hair damp with dew, service weapon drawn but low. One sweeping glance took in the scene. The duffel of restraints, the wire cutters, the 4 German shepherds arrayed like sentries. His gaze settled on the man in black, hands still raised, mask hanging from one gloved fist. "Name," the sheriff barked. The man's voice barely carried. "Gavin Rhodes." Dalton's brows knit. "Rhodes, as in Halberd Solutions K-9 Division?" A flicker of defeat crossed Gavin's face. "I was lead handler. Unit Prater. M." 2 deputies flanked him, cuffing his wrists with mechanical clicks that sounded far louder than handcuffs ever had before. As they patted him down, a syringe rolled from his pocket and hit the floor, spinning once before coming to rest at Knight's paws. The dog didn't flinch. He simply stared at the needle, then lifted his eyes to Rhodes with something that looked uncomfortably close to recognition, though whether it was loyalty or betrayal, no one could tell. Dalton picked up the syringe carefully, holding it to the light. "Ketamine and metatomidine," he muttered, reading the faded label. "Enough to drop a grizzly," Rhodes swallowed. "It was never meant for the girl. Just the dog so I could move them without hurting anyone." "That's supposed to make me feel better?" Dalton snapped. He turned to John. "Mind telling me how this guy ended up in your barn?" John shook his head, jaw tight. "He broke in, said he came to take them back." Dalton's expression hardened. He jerked his chin toward the deputies. "Read him his rights. Transport to county lockup. Notify the feds, animal welfare, and DOD. Gavin Rhodes didn't resist. As the deputies guided him past the dogs, he paused, eyes glistening. "Easy, Knight," he whispered. "Stand down." Knight's lip peeled back in a silent snarl that froze everyone in place. "Move it," Dalton ordered. The deputies hustled Rhodes outside, leaving a trail of fog-damp footprints on the barn floor. Only when the cruiser door slammed shut did Knight relax, shoulders loosening by fractional degrees. He exhaled a sound more like a sigh than a growling turned toward Aurora, who'd been standing in the doorway with her mother, clutching the blanket from last night tight around her shoulders. The sheriff holstered his weapon and approached father and daughter, boots crunching softly on straw. He tipped his hat to Aurora, then knelt to Knight's level, studying the scarred canine with something bordering on reverence. "These animals aren't just property," he said, voice low but firm enough to echo off wooden rafters. "They didn't just protect your home, they protected your child." His eyes lifted to John and Marion. "That makes them witnesses and heroes." Marion's hand found John's. Neither spoke, but the relief in their entwined fingers said enough. Dalton stood, rolling his shoulders. "I'll station a patrol here till sunrise, maybe longer. Whoever else is mixed up in Halberd's mess might come looking." "Sheriff," John asked quietly, "what happens to the dogs now?" Dalton glanced back at the 4 shepherds Knight, licking Aurora's palm, Luna nudging Bear's flank, Ash watching the departing cruisers until the taillights vanished. The sheriff's gaze softened. "Given what they've done tonight, I'd say they've earned a say in that decision." Ugh. Outside, dawn finally cracked open, spilling gold across the mist like a promise. For a moment, just one, the world felt steadier. Aurora knelt, wrapping both arms around Knight's neck. "You're safe," she whispered, as much to herself as to him. "I won't let them take you." Knight pressed into her, accepting the vow. Behind them, Sheriff Dalton radioed dispatch for federal liaison, but his eyes stayed on the girl and her guardians. It struck him then that some stories write themselves in gunshots and sirens, others in quiet moments where a child's trust meets a dog's unspoken oath. This one, he thought, was both. And it was far from over. By mid-morning, the Thompson driveway looked less like a farm road and more like the entrance to a county fair. Satellite trucks idled beside pickup trucks, power cables snaked through frost-browned grass, and a wall of tripods bristled at the fence line like metallic cornstalks chasing a single patch of sun. Word had spread faster than anyone expected. First, it was the local sheriff's Facebook post, just a terse notice that a wanted individual connected to a defunct military contractor had been apprehended. Then a deputy leaked the bit about 4 heroic German shepherds thwarting the break-in. By breakfast, every regional outlet had the headline. By 9:30, the national morning shows were teasing a segment about mysterious war dogs turn family farm into safe house. Now, news vans and neon paint jobs clogged the gravel drive. Reporters adjusted earpieces, makeup crews dabbed concealer under eyes, and photographers prowled for angles that wouldn't show the portable toilets hastily parked near the mailbox. Aurora watched it all from the porch swing, knees tucked under her chin. Night sat pressed against her side, tail draped across the wooden slats. The other 3 dogs formed a loose semicircle on the lawn Luna, calm but vigilant. Ash, a statue of amber-eyed suspicion, Bear trying, and failing, to look intimidating while sneaking glances at the cameramen's dangling lanyards. Sheriff Dalton had stationed 2 deputies by the gate, yet every few minutes another journalist slipped past with a badge that looked vaguely official. The air buzzed with questions. Is it true the dogs disarmed the suspect? Can you confirm the connection to Halberd Solutions? Ma'am, how does it feel knowing your daughter is safer with ex-military canines than local police? Marion fielded the last one with polite frost. My daughter is safer because brave officers and brave dogs work together, she said, guiding the mic gently away. Her voice held, but her eyes kept darting toward Aurora, worrying the attention might crush her. John stood beside the barn, arms crossed, speaking quietly with Sheriff Dalton. Every so often he glanced at the knot of reporters and rubbed the back of his neck as if trying to ease a weight that had settled there overnight. Mr. Thompson, a woman in a bright purple blazer called, stepping over a coil of television cable. We'd love a quick statement. Later, John said, not unkindly but firmly. He returned to Dalton. How long until the feds get here? Hard to say, the sheriff muttered. They smell headlines. They'll come running. A sudden burst of camera shutters fluttered through the yard. Aurora looked up to find the source, and there, at the bottom of the porch steps, stood a photographer crouched low, lens aimed directly at her. Night rose before Aurora could react. One step forward, chin lifted, body positioned between girl and stranger. No growl, no bark, just that quiet, indisputable line. Enough. The photographer froze, half smile collapsing. Sorry, kid, a beautiful shot. Aurora's pulse slowed only when Night settled beside her again. She laid a hand on his shoulder, more for her comfort than his. The blanket's soft fur grounded her in a way the hum of generators and the staccato of questions could not. Another reporter, a younger man with a local station badge, approached the porch rails more respectfully. Miss Thompson? He asked, voice gentle. Could you tell us what the dogs mean to you? Aurora hesitated. Cameras panned toward her like flowers turning to sun. She glanced at her parents. Marion nodded, once your choice. Slowly, Aurora stood. Night mirrored the movement, shoulder brushing her leg. She swallowed. She searched for words big enough. They're my friends. They keep me safe. And I think we keep them safe too. The young reporter smiled. Can we get a photo? Aurora looked down at Night. He met her eyes, then sat at her side with formal precision, ears perked, chest out, the very picture of a guardian accepting a post. She wrapped both arms around his neck. Camera shutters erupted like distant applause. Somewhere behind the wall of lenses, a woman sighed. Oh, that'll front page for sure. Flash after flash lit the morning haze, but Aurora barely noticed. She felt Night's steady heartbeat under her cheek, heard the soft click of his jaw as he exhaled. In that small circle of warmth, the chaos faded, the cables, the vans, the shouting questions. There was only the hush of fur under her fingers, and the certainty that no spotlight could outshine the quiet bond she shared with him. When the photographers finally stepped back, content with their treasure, Aurora whispered so only Night could hear. Whatever they write, they'll never really know you. Night's ear flicked, as though acknowledging a secret kept. At the gate, Sheriff Dalton raised a hand, signaling the crowd to settle. We'll give a formal statement at 11. Until then, respect the family's space. The reporters shuffled, adjusting schedules, rehearsing stand-ups. Yet even as they repositioned, their eyes kept drifting to the porch, where a girl and her sentinel sat shoulder to shoulder, proof, perhaps, that not every headline could capture the depth of a story written in trust. Behind them, the farmhouse door creaked open. John stepped onto the porch, laid a hand on Aurora's back, and looked out over the sea of microphones and satellite dishes. The world wanted answers, but first, he needed a promise. He met Sheriff Dalton's gaze. The older man nodded, reading the thought. Their next move had to keep the dog sand, the child they'd chosen, out of any cage, physical or political. Because once a story leaves a small town, It grows teeth. And the Thompsons weren't about to let those teeth bite the ones who'd already bled enough. By late afternoon, the media caravan had thinned, lured away by deadlines and fresher crises. What remained were deep ruts of tire tracks across the pasture and a hush that felt like the exhale after a storm. In that lull, Sheriff Dalton parked his cruiser beneath the oak, switched off the engine, and stepped onto the porch with a folder clutched under one arm. John met him at the door, exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes. Marion hovered behind, fingers still stained with ink from signing temporary trespass notices for the deputies. Aurora sat cross-legged on the living room rug, sketching the dogs in bright crayon armor, while Knight dozed beside her like a living muse. Dalton removed his hat. "Got a minute?" John held the screen door open. "Come on in." The sheriff's boots thudded softly across the floorboards. He glanced at the drawing on the coffee table, 4 hounds guarding a castle, a stick-figure princess smiling on the parapet. He smiled, then cleared his throat. "I spoke with the district attorney, the state vet board, and a couple folks higher up than either of them," he began, tapping the folder. "We're sitting on a mess of jurisdictional spaghetti, but there's one thread we can straighten." He opened the folder. Adoption papers. 4 sets. Signature lines, blank. Marion's breath caught. "You mean, if you want them," Dalton said, sliding the forms forward, "we can fast-track legal custody. County ordinance gives me leeway in cases where an animal prevents a violent felony, which they did, clear as day. State law lets the sheriff petition for immediate transfer if the original owner is unknown, deceased, or," he allowed himself a wry smile, "indicted by a federal grand jury. And—" John skimmed the first-page medical waiver, spay-neuter exemption for working dogs, liability clauses. His throat tightened when he reached the line, reading new owner, Thompson family. "Sheriff," he said quietly, "they're evidence in an open case. Won't the feds object?" "They might," Dalton admitted, "but evidence doesn't have to sit in a kennel. As legal custodians, you'd agree to present the dogs for any proceedings, keep them safe, no transfers without court approval. Given the alternative impoundment in an undisclosed facility, I figure this is better for everyone, especially the dogs." Aurora looked up from her drawing, eyes bright. "Does that mean they can stay? For real?" Dalton crouched to her level. "It means we put your names on papers so no one shows up with a van and says otherwise. They found a home, kiddo." He tousled her hair. "That's more than most of us ever get." Knight lifted his head, amber eyes following the sheriff. Dalton met the gaze steady, unafraid, and for a fleeting second, something passed between man and dog. Acknowledgement. Maybe even gratitude. John set the papers on the kitchen island and reached for a pen. Marion placed her hand over his, stopping him. "This makes us responsible," she whispered. "We already are," he answered. "Signing just makes it official." She nodded, tears threatening. Together they inked their names, Jonathan Cole Thompson, Marion Elise Thompson, beneath each dog's provisional call sign. Knight, Luna, Ash, Bear. Aurora printed her own scrawled signature on the secondary caregiver line, tongue between her teeth in concentration. Dalton gathered the pages, slid them back into the folder. "I'll file these first thing. You'll get stamped copies by next week." He rose to go, then hesitated. "One more thing. My K-9 unit trains every Saturday behind the fairgrounds. If you'd like, bring the dogs. Give them work, structure. Might help them decompress and show the brass they're more than science projects." John extended his hand. "We'll be there." Dalton shook it firmly. "Good. You'll need sturdy leashes. And maybe ear protection. Sergeant Irving likes his flashbang demos." The sheriff tipped his hat to Aurora, offered Knight a respectful nod, and stepped back into the fading light. As the cruiser rolled down the drive, Marion exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "They're ours," she said, voice small but awed. John draped an arm around her shoulders. "Looks like the family just got bigger." Aurora darted to the window, waving at the departing patrol car, then spun toward the dogs. "Hear that? Nobody's taking you away." Knight's tail swept the floor like a metronome set to hope. Luna pressed her head under Aurora's hand. Ash settled by the door, vigilant but calm. Bear flopped onto his back, legs in the air, as if the weight of uncertainty had finally rolled off his broad chest. Outside, the last press van crept down the gravel road, its antenna folding like a closing chapter. In its wake, the farm fell into a gentler silence, the kind that smells of cut grass and promises kept. Papers could make ownership legal, but the bond had been forged long before ink met page. It had been written in a rattlesnake's hiss, a flashlight's flicker, a cage-filled nightmare, and a girl's whispered plea beneath a silver moon. Now, at last, it was written in law, and in the hush that followed, Aurora whispered the only oath that mattered. "We keep each other safe. Always." Knight's answering nudge said he'd already signed. The first hint that the storm had broken came over breakfast, when John flicked on the kitchen radio and heard his own address read aloud on a national news update. Federal officials have reopened their investigation into defunct defense contractor Halberd Solutions after a dramatic capture at a rural farm in Redwood Crest, where 4 genetically enhanced German Shepherd sons, part of Halberd's clandestine Praetor program, thwarted a suspected abductor. John's spoon hovered in midair, honey dripping back into his coffee. Marion set down her mug so fast it sloshed across the table. In the living room, Aurora muted her cartoon and turned up the volume on the flat screen as the anchor's voice carried through the house. Newly unsealed documents detail illegal neural stem implants, hormone protocols, and live-fire testing on canines. The Department of Justice confirms all evidence originated from one location, the Thompson family farm. Hello. A montage followed news drone footage of the barn roof. Aurora hugging Knight on the porch steps. Deputies loading Gavin Rhodes into a cruiser. Over each clip flashed words like, "exclusive," "Black Ops bioethics," "Dog saved a child." Aurora's cheeks flushed. "That's our barn," she whispered. Equal parts pride and dread. In D.C., a junior senator announced emergency hearings, promising that no animal will suffer in silence again. In Phoenix, a former Halberd accountant emailed Sheriff Dalton a trove of billing records proof of offshore shell companies and disposal fees marked PAW 01 through PAW 16. At a California rescue conference, veterinarians held a candlelight vigil for the unnamed dogs who never made it out. By noon, number Praetor Pack was trending worldwide. The community responded first. Neighbors dropped casseroles and thank you cards at the gate, their kids craning for a glimpse of the movie dogs. A bakery delivered biscuits, shaped like badges. Someone left 4 brand new canine vests with Thompson Ranch embroidered in gold. But not all visitors were friendly. A black sedan government plate sidled outside the driveway for an hour before sliding away. Reporters dug up drone images of covert test ranges in New Mexico, overlaying each with Aurora's wide-eyed portrait until she looked like the poster child for corporate sin. Inside, Sheriff Dalton sat at the kitchen table, laptop open to a classified portal. "DOJ task force wants the full incident report," he said, scrolling. "They're calling your place the fulcrum of the case." Marion arched a brow. "Meaning?" "Meaning Halberd's lawyers will try to paint you as trespassers in their mess," he sighed. "But the optics are terrible for them, girl. Family farm, hero dogs. You're David to their Goliath." Knight patted over and set his head on Aurora's lap, sensing the tension. She stroked the thick fur between his ears, anchoring herself to his stillness. From a holding cell, Gavin Rhodes entered a plea agreement. His statement hit every major outlet by evening. "I trained Praetor 01 through negative 04. They were promised retirement after deployment trials. Instead, orders came to terminate and erase evidence. I released them in Redwood Crest because I knew they'd protect a family, the way they tried to protect us in field tests." He provided access codes, GPS logs, a list of vets coerced into falsifying records. Each revelation pushed Halberd's stock already frozen into free fall. The CEO issued a pre-recorded denial. 4 hours later, the board forced his resignation. Congresswoman Ellis held a press conference on Capitol Hill, flanked by advocacy groups and a blown-up photo of Aurora wrapped around Knight's neck. "A little girl's loyalty exposed what regulators failed to see," she declared. "These dogs were soldiers and victims. Their new mission starts today, changing the law." Night fell, but the farm lights stayed on. Inside, soft piano music played from Marion's phone anything to mute the constant news ping. John reviewed a stack of subpoenas. Each bore their address at the top. "We're in the eye now," he murmured. Aurora stepped onto the porch with Knight at her side and stared at the road, where a deputy cruiser idled like a lighthouse. Flashbulbs no longer frightened her. They felt distant, part of another world. She knelt and whispered, You did this. You showed them. Night's amber eyes reflected the porch light, calm as embers after a blaze. From the living room, the television cut to a commentator. One quiet farm in Northern County has become the hinge on which this entire scandal swings. Aurora smiled, pressing her forehead to Knight's. They can have the headlines, she said. We keep the truth. Behind her, Marian leaned in the doorway, arms folded but face soft with wonder. Tomorrow will bring more questions, she warned. The quiet that followed felt deceptively fragile, like a soap bubble skimming the air of the Thompson farm. With the reporters finally gone, their cables coiled up like serpents defeated. The yard gradually reclaimed its usual sounds, the locusts drumming against eucalyptus bark, the rhythmic protest of the porch swing as it wavered in a gentle breeze, and the soft, measured breathing of 4 German shepherds now sprawled in their chosen places of rest. Knight lay nearest the foot of the porch steps, chin crossing his paws, amber eyes half-lidded but vigilant. Ash occupied the shade thrown by the lone sycamore nose facing west, as though reading the secrets trembled by shifting winds. Luna had chosen the softer earth beneath the clothesline, tail sweeping low arcs across tufted grass. And Bear, ever the comfortable brute, was half on his side, half on his back beside the wilted vegetable patch, snoring lightly. Marian watched them for a while, thumbs brushing the backs of Aurora's knuckles. Around them, the day exhaled color-morning gold had tipped to afternoon brass, then to a syrupy bronze thickening across the horizon. A single hawk spiraled overhead, casting a quick shadow no bigger than a coin. Knight's ears flicked at the motion, but he stayed where he was. Even predators had learned there was little appetite for mischief beneath the watch of sentinel eyes. "Will they ever tire of guarding us?" Marian asked, voice low, not wanting to disturb the strange spell of calm that had settled. Aurora tilted her head, thinking. "I think guarding feels like breathing to them," she said after a moment. "But maybe," she looked toward Bear's upturned paws, "maybe they're learning other kinds of breathing too." Marian smiled. That simple observation felt profound. For months the dogs had breathed only vigilance. Now, bit by bit, they inhaled pieces of normal life. The smell of overbaked blueberry muffins, the crisp promise of cut grass, the playful squeal of the garden hose. They were, at last, learning rest. John emerged from the house with 3 steaming mugshot chocolate for Aurora and sweet tea for the adults. He balanced them in one hand, a habit learned during long years of carrying feed buckets. "They're broadcasting footage of the indictment," he said, nodding toward the glowing television inside. "Halberd executives in cuffs. And guess what? The networks finally got our address spelling right." He offered the last sentence with a dry chuckle, but his shoulders sagged as though each headline printed across the nation weighed him down. Marian accepted her mug. "If the world must learn our name, at least they'll spell it correctly." Aurora sipped cautiously, eyes traveling to the barn. From where she stood, the wooden ribs of the structure looked like the hull of a beached ship, weather-beaten but resolute. No matter how often she walked its hay-strewn corridors, she could never quite shake the ghost of their arrival. 4 silhouettes framed in dust-laced sunbeams, breath alive with unspoken orders. An urge tugged at her now. Leaving her mother's side, she padded across the yard, mindful of the uneven patches of ground. Knight's head lifted, nose twitching, but he let her pass. She reached the barn door, slid it open just enough to slip inside, and inhaled. Compared to the frenetic energy of the news crew's equipment, the barn hummed like a low violin, string-rich and resonant. The scent of timber, sun-dried straw, and a faint trace of motor oil clung to the air. Late afternoon light slanted through the rafters, illuminating particles that swirled like fallen stardust. This was the place where everything had changed, and Aurora needed to see it under its new identity. She walked between hay bales, stacked taller than her head, boots crunching gently on the ground. Each step echoed the memory of that first morning. But where fear had once reverberated, now there was something else. Acceptance. She paused next to the poster she had pinned months ago. My Sentinels. Still crisp and bright because her mother dutifully dusted it each week. Beneath it hung a corkboard plastered with new artifacts. A faded clipping of the Barn Guardian's headline, The adoption certificates Sheriff Dalton had rushed through the courthouse, and drawings from fourth-grade classmates who'd been inspired to meet the world-famous hero dogs. Aurora touched one of those drawings, a crayon portrait of Knight wearing a cape drawn by her best friend, Lily. "Thank you for being brave." Lily had scrawled in curvy handwriting. Aurora smiled, tracing the red cape. "You should have seen him with a real bite sleeve," she whispered to the silent barn, imagining the dogs demonstrating for Sheriff Dalton's canine trainees. Cape would have been redundant. A rustle near the door made her turn. Marion had followed, but stopped at the threshold, her silhouette framed by horizontal light. She carried a cardboard tube she'd found under Aurora's bed, another drawing from last night, no doubt. "You planning to start a gallery in here?" Marion teased, stepping closer. Aurora shrugged, but accepted the tube, carefully unrolling the poster. This one showed the family seated around a picnic blanket under a cartoon sun. Knight lounged beside them. But this time, significantly, he wore no tactical harness, no hint of duty. And beneath the group, Aurora had written in bubble letters, "Home is a promise." Marion's eyes softened. "That's beautiful. Maybe we can hang it next to Mr. Harold's photo," Aurora suggested, remembering the veteran's visit last month when he passed Ajax's collar tag to Knight. Marion nodded, retrieving a strip of painter's tape from the little tin on a stump used as a barn end table. Together, they fixed the new drawing on the wall, another chapter in the ongoing testament of transformation. When they stepped back outside, the sky had turned a deeper amber, with cotton candy clouds smearing the horizon. John was seated on the porch swing, playing a slow progression on his weather-worn guitar. The notes floated across the yard like the last birds heading south. Knight lay close to him, eyes half closed, head gently bobbing to the rhythm. Marion settled beside her husband. Aurora curled onto the porch steps a rung below, sipping chocolate and letting the song weave around her. The dogs seemed to attune themselves to the melody. Luna's tail beat in time. Bear gave a low groan that somehow harmonized, and Ash, eyes still scanning the dusk, allowed his ears to droop in contentment. John ended on a soft minor chord, fingers lingering. "We never asked them what kind of music they liked," he mused. "Guess they prefer guitar. Or maybe they prefer whatever we're doing together," Marion suggested, leaning her shoulder into him. Aurora tipped her head back, catching the first star igniting overhead. For a brief heartbeat, she remembered the sirens, both literal and metaphorical, that had encircled their farm. The cacophony of scandal still rang in airwaves, but here at ground level, peace planted thicker roots each passing day. "Mom?" she said suddenly. "Yes, sweetheart? Do you think we'll ever forget how scary it felt in the beginning?" Marion considered the question. "I hope we remember just enough," she answered. "Enough to stay grateful. Not so much we can't move forward." Knight turned his head, nuzzling Aurora's elbow, as if seconding Marion's sentiment. She scratched behind his ear, feeling the velvety fold beneath her fingertips. "Besides," she added, "if we remember the fear, we'll remember how we beat it together." "Oh." The screen door creaked, and Sheriff Dalton stepped out of the house, invited over for dinner and another debrief call with federal agents. He wore civilian clothes, but his badge glinted on his belt. "Didn't mean to interrupt," he said, catching the tail end of conversation. "You're not interrupting," John insisted, gesturing to an empty rocking chair. Dalton sat, craning his neck to look at the horizon. "Government convoy will be escorting more seized records upstate tonight," he reported. "Looks like the last piece of Halberd's puzzle." "That must feel good," Marion said. Dalton nodded but didn't smile. "It does, but it's bittersweet. Took a family to risk everything, dogs included, to get the truth out." He reached down, giving Luna a scratch. "She still flinches at camera flashes?" "Less and less," Aurora answered. "I think she knows the worst is over." Dalton leaned back, exhaling. "Dogs like these, they'll always be scanning the horizon, waiting for orders that no longer come. But you've given them a new command. Just live." Night seeped fully in, bringing the orchestra of crickets and a cool breeze. Marion rose to turn on the porch light, then hesitated, fingers near the switch. She looked at John. He shook his head gently. They didn't need the artificial glare. The moon would do. One by one, the dogs drifted toward their nighttime posts, Night at the porch's base, Luna at Aurora's bedroom door upstairs, Ash halfway between barn and house. Bear sprawled across the threshold because subtlety had never been his forte. And inside the barn, if one listened carefully, boards groaned a tired but satisfied sound, like a warrior finally allowed to sit. What secrets remained? Perhaps only those held in the dog's dreams, ghostly missions burning away each night, replaced by visions of open fields and a child's laughter. Secrets fade when silence is safe, and there is enough silence here now to fill the world. Hours later, after dishes were washed and Dalton had taken his leave, Marion found John by the barn door. He traced the grain with a fingertip. "Feel that?" he asked her. She closed her eyes, placed her palm where his rested. The wood pulsed faint warmth from a day's stored sun. "It feels alive, feels like it's breathing," he murmured. They stood a while longer until the barn's outline melted into darkness and the only light came from windows brimming with dim lamp glow. They whispered goodnight to the dogs, who didn't stir they trusted no, when walked back hand in hand across cool grass. Overhead, more stars arrived, a silent audience applauding an ordinary family's extraordinary year. Wind tousled Marion's hair, kissed the edges of John's flannel, and threaded between Aurora's fingers where she leaned on the sill inside, gazing out. It carried scents of pine and future plans, whisking away old echoes of boot prints, broken locks, encrypted chips. The invisible line had shifted, yes, but under vigilant eyes and open hearts, it would not break again. Somewhere, miles away, a final siren whooped and died. Silence claimed the valley deep, resonant and sure. And in that hush, the barn, the family, and 4 once-lost guardians settled into their truest names. Not evidence, not headlines, but proof of a simpler truth. Love arrives in many uniforms, sometimes tattered, sometimes fur-covered. When we welcome it, we become its champions and its sanctuary. The wind shifted once more, soft enough now to rustle only leaves and dreams. The barn exhaled. The dogs slept. The family did too. And the night, at last, was whole. The manila envelope arrived on a Thursday, hand-delivered by Sheriff Dalton himself. Its weight felt impossibly light for the promise it carried. Inside were 4 embossed certificates, each stamped with the county seal and signed by a judge who'd waved robe and gavel for the sake of speed. Owner of record, Thompson family. Subject, Knight, Luna, Ash, Bear. There was a notation in the margin, waiver of standard euthanasia review per heroic service. Below it, a single line in Dalton's own scrawl. They earned this. John laid the papers on the kitchen table the way one sets down cherished photographs, carefully, reverently. Marion traced the raised ink of the seal, eyes bright. For weeks they had lived in limbo, guardians in practice, but not on paper. Now the law had caught up with reality. Aurora burst through the doorway, still wearing her school backpack. She spotted the certificates and squealed. Knight's ears shot up. Luna barked one high, joyous note that startled even herself. Bear spun in a happy circle, nearly wiping out a chair, and Ash trotted over to rest his head on Aurora's shoulder, a quiet anchor amid the celebration. Sheriff Dalton cleared his throat. "Paperwork is half the job," he said, though his grin betrayed his satisfaction. "Other half is purpose. You up for Saturday training?" John nodded. "We'll be there." The field behind the county fairgrounds was usually home to demolition derby cars and autumn hayrides. But on weekend mornings it transformed into a tactical playground. Orange cones outlined obstacle courses. Plywood walls stood like stage flats waiting for actors, and beyond them a ragged tree line served as a live scent tracking zone. Sergeant Irving barrel-chested, voice like gravel met them at the gate. "Thompson's," he greeted, tipping his ball cap, then eyed the dogs. "Prater pack, huh? Let's see what muscle memory looks like after months in retirement." Knight answered by sitting at perfect heel without a word. Luna mirrored him. Ash and Bear followed a heartbeat later. Irving raised a brow. "Well, hell, better posture than my rookies." Training began with basics. Sit, stay, down, heel commands. Aurora gave in soft tones that floated across the dewy grass. The dogs responded with crisp precision, but something new hovered in their movements' freedom. No leashes, no electric collars, just trust woven through muscle and bone. Next came the confidence course. Knight sailed over a 6-foot A-frame, landed, and pivoted to check Aurora's position before advancing. Luna threaded a pipe tunnel in fluid silence. Bear lumbered through the tire ladder, paws thumping, tail wagging like a banner of determination. Ash hesitated at the teeter boardwood, creaking under his weight, then crossed, ears pinned, eyes ahead. When he touched solid ground, Aurora knelt and whispered praise only he could hear. His tension melted into a low rumble of contentment. Deputies watched, with folded arms, murmuring that the pack moved like a single organism, 4 heartbeats, one intention. Dalton noted every cue. Knight's tendency to scan for exits, Luna's habit of circling the perimeter, Bear's instinct to stick close to Aurora, Ash's split-second glances that checked the horizon for threats unseen. Irving introduced scent work next, hiding small vials of gun oil and black powder residue under cinder blocks. Standard explosives familiarization, he explained, planting one by the bleachers, another beneath a picnic table. Knight found the first vial in under 10 seconds, freezing with nose to ground until Aurora rewarded him. Luna alerted on the second, pawing once, then backing UPA textbook signal. Deputies exchanged impressed nods. No retraining necessary, one muttered. They never lost it. But the real test came when Irving fired a starter pistol into a dirt berm. The crack shattered the morning calm. Rusty, the sheriff's own retired retriever, flinched 10 yards away. Knight snapped to attention. Eyes locked on the sound's originate, he didn't bolt or bark. Instead, he pivoted to Aurora, awaiting instruction. She placed a steady hand on his neck. "I'm okay," she whispered. He believed her. Irving holstered the pistol. That, folks, is restraint money can't buy. Break time meant plastic cups of water and folding chair chatter. Aurora sat cross-legged in the grass, doodling cones and tunnels in a notebook, while the dogs lounged around her like living pillars. Irving approached with 2 laminated ID cards. Service Animal County Auxiliary K9 stamped across each in gold ink. "One covers all 4. Second's a backup," he said, handing them to John. "Doesn't give him power to make arrests," he added with a wink. "But it keeps him from being bounced out of hotels or disaster shelters. They're on the books now, official guardians." Marion exhaled, relief mingling with pride. "What's next?" Dalton joined them, arms crossed. "Quarterly evaluations, maybe some school demos. Beyond that, let them live a dog's life chasing sticks, stealing sandwiches, sleeping on couches." Aurora grinned. "Bear already does the sandwich part." Dalton's gaze softened. "Good. They've carried enough weight." That evening, the family gathered on the porch while a July sunset bled orange over the fields. 4 new tags jingled softly on 4 new collars engraved with names, phone number, and a single line beneath. Thompson Guardian. John raised a mason jar of lemonade. "To official paperwork," he said. Marion clinked hers. "To second chances." Aurora lifted a cup of grape soda. "To the best dogs in the whole world." "Oh." Knight, seated between them, gave a small woof agreement, or maybe thanks. And as the first stars sparked above, the Thompson farm finally felt less like a battlefield waiting for the next bullet and more like what it had always wanted to be, a refuge where broken things could mend, where watchdogs could sleep belly up, and where a little girl could dream without the weight of cages in her nightmares. Official or not, the title fit them now. Guardians by law, by loyalty, by love. Dawn slipped over Redwood Crest like a slow pour of honey, gilding the weathered fence posts and bathing the farmhouse in soft gold. Aurora woke before her alarm, now not from nightmares, but from the comforting weight of Bear's head nudging the mattress. He huffed a warm greeting, tail thumping just once, so as not to wake anyone else. Across the room, Luna stretched in a silent bow, while Ash positioned himself by the window, scanning the yard out of habit more than worry. Knight lay at the threshold, guardian. Turned door main ears, flicking at the first creak of a floorboard. Breakfast smelled different these days. Marion's cinnamon apple oatmeal mingled with the earthy scent of 4 dogs who considered the kitchen their mess hall. Knight sat beside Aurora's chair, posture regal, waiting for her whispered, "Okay." That single word unleashed a synchronized chorus of lapping tongues at stainless steel bowls. No commands, no shouted orders, just trust. Rehearsed each morning like a hymn. After the bus rumbled away with Aurora waving from the back window, the farm settled into its weekday rhythm. Knight shadowed John during chores, herding errant hens with gentle nudges instead of sharp barks. Luna trotted the perimeter twice, then sunbathed on the porch, soaking warmth into scars that once ached in cold weather. Ash discovered a new pastime-balanced watch from the hayloft window, head swiveling like a lighthouse lamp, but his tail swayed now, loose and lazy. Bear. Well, Bear found joy in simple things. Tugging fallen laundry from the line only to return it with slobbery pride, or rolling in clover until his black coat bloomed green. At 4 p.m., the yellow bus belched to a stop. Aurora tumbled off, backpack bouncing, Knight already sprinting across the driveway to greet her. She knelt in the gravel, arms thrown wide. He skidded to a gentle halt, muzzle resting against her shoulder, as if to count her heartbeat and confirm she was whole. Every afternoon bore this ritual reassurance exchanged without a word. Homework happened on the porch swing. Luna nestled at Aurora's feet, absorbing multiplication woes, as though numbers could be diffused into fur. When a breeze rattled the maple leaves too loudly, Ash's head lifted, but he settled again at a soft pat learning that some noises meant autumn, not alarm. Bear's contribution was comedic relief, dropping a grime-streaked tennis ball onto Aurora's worksheet, tail sweeping sawdust off the planks. She laughed more these days. The dogs, in turn, seemed lighter, as if each giggle loosened an invisible collar around their throats. Evenings belonged to training, or rather, play that looked like training. Sheriff Dalton had insisted on bite-sleeve drills once a week, but he tempered rigor with praise, reminding the pack there was no mission now but living well. Knight executed recall drills flawlessly, yet broke form the moment Aurora clapped, galloping back for ear scratches instead of formal release. Luna learned agility on a Frankensteined course of hay bales and tractor tires. Her landing on the final jump always ended with a playful bow toward Bear, who true to his name bulldozed the obstacles instead of clearing them. The deputies watching from squad cars often shook their heads, grinning. Lethal precision rewritten into joyful imperfection. Some vigilance remained. On foggy nights, Ash still circled the yard before bedding down. Knight positioned himself along the hallway like a furry nightlight. But when owls hooted from the pines, no growl followed only a quiet yawn and the soft shuffle of paws reconnecting with sleepers. Aurora's dreams had changed too. Cages replaced by open fields where she and the dogs raced until sunrise washed them in gold. Marion kept a journal she never meant to publish. Her newest entry read, "They are not weapons. They are the cracks where light gets in." She noted small Miraclisa scar on Luna's flank, growing pink and healthy. Bear learning gentle with the barn kittens. Ash falling asleep with his head on a plush rabbit. Aurora once clutched in fear. She wrote of John's laugh returning full-bodied like barn doors thrown open in spring. On Saturdays, the family drove to the fairgrounds for K-9 sessions. One morning, Sergeant Irving handed Aurora a junior handler patch. The cloth badge wasn't official, but the weight of it made her stand taller. She clipped it to her backpack. Knight nosed it, then pressed his forehead to hers, a silent oath that whatever path she walked, 4 sets of paws would flank it. That night, under a spray of Milky Way stars, John set up the fire pit. Sparks drifted upward like whispered thanks. Aurora roasted marshmallows, laughter sticky on her tongue. The dogs ringed the circle watchful guardians turned family audience. When the last ember winked out, they followed Aurora inside, tails swishing through the doorway as though sweeping the dark from her path. Upstairs, Aurora paused at her bedroom threshold. She looked over her shoulder at her parents and the 4 shadows waiting patiently. "I used to be scared of the night," she said, voice soft but sure. "Now it feels like the night is scared of us." No one corrected her. Knight curled at the foot of her bed. Luna took the rug. Bear sprawled halfway under the desk. Ash chose the window, eyes half-lidded, peaceful. Aurora slipped under the quilt, the sleeve patch badge now pinned to her pillow like a private constellation. Downstairs, Marion switched off the hallway light. John locked the door but left the porch lamp unlit. The real security system wore fur and breathed steady. As they climbed the stairs, he whispered, "They fit." Marion squeezed his hand. "Now fit them." And somewhere between midnight and dawn, the farm exhaled in harmony, human heartbeats syncing with canine ones. Dreams weaving through dreams, stitched together by trust so quiet it sounded like nothing at all. They would remain alert because that's who they were. But the sharp edges had dulled. The alarm softened. Guardian still. Only now they guarded home. The August moon rose swollen and amber, tilting long shadows across the hayfield and gilding each cornstalk like a candlewick. The house had surrendered to sleep windows dark, the porch swing stilled yet. Aurora padded barefoot through grass still warm from the day's heat, cradling a rolled sheet of poster paper against her chest. She moved with the hush of children keeping secrets. Careful steps past the lilac bushes, a glance over her shoulder at the silent windows, then onward to the barn that had once been a battleground and was now merely theirs. Inside, Night's slow breaths thrummed like a low drumbeat. Luna's tail thumped twice in drowsy acknowledgement. Ash opened one eye amber in the lamplight, then settled again. Bear snored a soft, comedic trill, sprawled on his back, paws twitching in some half-remembered dream of running. Aurora stopped just outside the door, heart fluttering in her throat. She unrolled the poster and studied it under the lantern glow. She had drawn herself at the center, stick figure thin but smiling wide, arms raised as though directing music no one else could hear. Circling her were 4 dogs rendered in crayon, Vigornite shaded, charcoal gray, ash burnished brown, Luna gleaming silver, Bear a thundercloud scribble with floppy ears. Around them she'd sketched a ring of tiny stars, each labeled with words she'd practiced writing over and over: loyal, brave, gentle, free. At the bottom, in block letters thick with marker strokes, my sentinels. She hesitated, then taped the drawing to the weather-worn planks beside the latch, pressing each corner flat. The paper looked fragile against that rough wood, yet in her mind it was as indelible as carved stone. A breeze slid through the cracked window, carrying the mingled scents of hay, pine, and old wood. It fluttered the edges of the poster, making the drawn figures seem to breathe. Aurora traced one fingertip along Night's sketched silhouette. "Thank you," she whispered, voice no louder than the rustle of straw, "for staying." Behind her, paws rustled. Night appeared in the doorway, head tilted. He regarded the drawing, then her face, then the drawing again, as if connecting dots only he could see. Without a sound, he pressed his nose to the paper, right over the word brave. For an instant, Aurora feared the ink might smudge, but Night's touch was feather-light, reverent. The barn seemed to hold its breath. Luna padded forward next, silent as snowfall. She sniffed the crayon stars, chose one labeled gentle, and sat beneath it with quiet pride. Ash joined, stationing himself to the right of Aurora's stick figure likeness, shoulders squared in an echo of every perimeter he'd ever guarded. Bear lumbered over last, tail swishing, and flopped beside the word free, letting out a satisfied groan as he settled into a mound of straw. Aurora stepped back, taking in the tableau. 4 living shadows mirroring their crayon selves, the lantern light turning their coats to bronze and gold. Something in her chest expanded too large for words, wide enough to hold night and sky. Outside, a screech owl called from the tree line. None of the dogs stirred. The sound was no longer a threat. It was simply a note in the symphony of home. She pressed her palm to the barn door, feeling the cool wood under her skin, and made a promise she'd carry long after she outgrew nightgowns and crayon constellations. "I'll be your sentinel too," she said, "even when I'm small." Night's ears flicked. Ash's tail swept the straw once. Luna rested her chin on her paws. Bear snored on cue. Acceptance in 4 different languages, all perfectly understood. Aurora extinguished the lantern, plunging the barn into silver moonwash. For a moment, the only light came from the poster's white page, glowing softly like a keepsake star. Then she turned and slipped back across the yard, guided by memory more than sight. At the porch steps, she paused, looking back. In the doorway loomed a single silhouette Knight, standing sentinel at the threshold, the drawing behind him rustling in the night breeze. Under the moon, dog and child exchanged one final glance. No fear, no sadness, only the quiet strength of a bond forged in danger and now tempered in peace. The farmhouse door clicked shut. The screen settled. Knight returned to his pack, the barn embracing him in darkness, scented of promise rather than secrecy. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint creak of paper against wood, a soft mantra, repeating into the stars. "My sentinels." And for the first night since their arrival, the property felt wholly, utterly, wholly safe circle, where even silence could rest. Autumn rolled in on the hush of turning leaves and the faint tang of wood smoke from far-off chimneys. Each morning, dew pearls clung to the mailbox at the foot of the Thompson Drive, glittering like tiny invitations. And every day that box was full bulging with padded envelopes, embossed stationery, and courier packets stamped urgent in scarlet ink. It started with a single letter from a children's magazine. We'd love Aurora to write a first-person piece about courage, pets, and family. Then an email from a New York publisher. Subject line simply, book deal. Within a week, the trickle became a torrent. A documentary crew offered 6 figures for exclusive access. A Los Angeles producer floated a limited series option, promising to cast the dogs as themselves, CGI enhancements minimal. Universities proposed veterinary fellowships in Knight's name. An adventure gear brand pitched a K9 hiking line featuring Luna on promotional banners. Even a luxury kennel in Dubai wrote, asking to adopt the genetically superior canines for prestigious breeding purposes, sweetening the proposition with 7 zeros. John sorted the mail at the kitchen island each evening, stacking offers into neat piles labeled media, merch, appearances, other. Marion brewed coffee she rarely finished, scanning contracts dense with clauses about likeness rights and perpetual licensing. Aurora watched from her spot at the table, pencils idle over math homework as she tried to imagine Knight under studio lights or Bear boarding an airplane in a cargo crate labeled VIP. One Thursday, the doorbell chimed. A polished woman in a tailored suit stood on the porch, portfolio tucked under one arm. Her smile was rehearsed to the millimeter. "Good afternoon. I represent Heartline Publishing America's premier inspirational imprint. We believe your remarkable story could heal millions." She produced a glossy mock-up, a hardcover jacket featuring Aurora in a white dress, arms wrapped around Knight beneath a title wrought in pastel script, Sentinels of the Heart. In the background, the farmhouse had been replaced by a sprawling meadow of impossible sunflowers. Aurora stared at the picture, then at the real Knight, who padded over with straw in his fur and a single burr stuck to his tail. The contrast felt dizzying. She glanced at her parents. John cleared his throat. "Ma'am, it's kind of you to visit, but we're not interested." The woman's smile tightened. "Perhaps we should discuss numbers." "We're not interested," Marion echoed, softer but firmer. The agent's eyes flicked to Aurora calculating, hopeful then back to the parents. When no crack appeared in their resolve, she nodded, professional mask sliding back into place. "If you change your minds, the offer stands." She handed over a business card embossed in gold leaf and retreated down the steps, heels clicking like punctuation marks on gravel. Inside, Marion set the card atop the growing stack and exhaled through her nose. "It's flattering, but exhausting." John rubbed the bridge of his nose. "And a little predatory." "Huh?" Aurora reached for the publishing mock-up, studied her smiling likeness. The girl on the cover looked brave in a way that cost nothing. She turned the sheet over and wrote on the blank back, "They're not for show, they're for here." Knight rested his head on her knee, as though reading the words upside down. She scratched behind his ears. "You're not a business, you're my family." End of That night, they drafted a single response to the avalanche of requests to letter John posted on the farm's newly created website. "To whom it may concern, thank you for your interest in our dog story. We understand their journey has touched many hearts. Our family believes the best way to honor Knight, Luna, Ash, and Bear is to let them live quietly, free from cages, cameras, and contracts. They are not for sale, adoption, or franchising. They have found their home, and we choose to keep it that way. We appreciate your understanding and encourage you to support local shelters and working dog rescues. Sincerely, the Thompson family." Marion pressed publish, and an odd peace settled in the Kachinas if they'd built a small dam against a rising tide. Outside, sunset bled apricot over the pasture. Aurora took Knight's new leather lead from its hook, though most walks required none at all, and they wandered beneath the maple trees, shedding coins of gold. She breathed in the scent of damp earth and distant hay bales, and wondered how many other families were out there, quietly guarding miracles the world would never photograph. She knelt and whispered into Knight's fur, "We picked us." "Huh?" Knight's low, contented grunt seemed to say, "Always." Back at the house, John added the business card to a shoebox already half full labels from talent agencies, embossed envelopes, glossy proofs. Someday, maybe they'd make a scrapbook titled "The Offers We Declined." But for now, it fit better in a closet than on a shelf. When Aurora and Knight returned, twilight pooling behind them, Marion opened the screen door and smiled. Dinner's on. No cameras, no contracts, just spaghetti. Aurora laughed. The good kind with too much cheese. The only kind. As plates clinked and stories mingled with steam, 4 dogs arranged themselves around the table guardians at ease. No flashbulbs required. The world beyond the mailbox would keep spinning, hungry for angles and exclusives. But inside these walls, a simpler headline was enough, written in the quiet certainty of chosen bonds. Home found, family made, story still unfolding off limits to everything but love. Late September carried a hush that felt like respect crickets softening their song, maples dropping leaves quiet as confetti. On a Saturday afternoon painted in bronze light, Aurora lounged on the porch swing, sketchpad balanced on her knees, while Night dozed at her feet. The house smelled of apple butter cooling on the stove. Gravel crunched beyond the gate. She looked up to see Mr. Harold there, octogenarian, neighbor-racing his pickup into the drive. The truck idled, coughing once before settling. Harold climbed down slowly, a cardboard box tucked under one arm, its edges softened by time. His cane tapped a steady beat across the yard. John stepped off the porch to greet him. "Everything okay, sir?" Harold nodded, eyes lingering on Night. "Brought something that belongs here, I think." He lifted the box, lips twitching in a half-smile. Aurora hopped down the steps, curiosity leading. Night rose beside her, tail sweeping politely. Bear, Luna, and Ash emerged from behind the barn, ears pricked. Despite countless visits, the dogs always regarded Harold with a special sort of deference-like. They sensed a history stitched beneath his weathered flannel. Harold shuffled to the picnic table beneath the oak and set the box down. "Found these cleaning out the attic," he said, voice gravelly but warm. From inside, he produced a stack of photographs black and white, edges scallopedanned, a faded military field manual, bound in cracked leather. He slid a photo toward Aurora. It showed a younger Harold back straight, uniform, crisp kneeling beside a German shepherd whose ears stood like flags. The dog's eyes, though colorless and monochrome, carried the same fierce devotion Aurora had come to know. "I was a canine handler back in '62, Harold said, tapping the corner of the photo. "Fort Benning. Here's Ajax. Saved my hide more times than I could count." John's eyebrows lifted. "You never mentioned." Harold chuckled. "War stories bore most folks. But when those 4 wandered into your barn, I recognized the posture, the discipline." He turned to Night, who stood an arm's length away, head tilted. "Figured one soldier ought to salute another before time runs me out." He reached into the box again and withdrew a brass collar tag, initials USA faint but legible. He placed it in Aurora's palm. "Ajax is..." Thought Night ought to see. It reminded him he's in good company. Aurora's fingers closed around the token. It felt heavy with stories. She knelt before Night and pressed the tag gently against his chest fur. Night sniffed it, then nudged Aurora's hand as if acknowledging a shared secret. Harold lowered himself onto the bench with a groan. Night approached, slow and respectful, until their faces were inches apart. The old man rested a gnarled hand on the dog's massive head, thumb brushing the scar above Night's brow. His voice dropped to a whisper meant only for canine ears. "You did good, soldier." Night's eyes softened, lids drooping as though under a familiar command of rest. For a heartbeat, time folded. Grizzled veteran and battle-scarred guardian, linked by quiet understanding. Aurora felt the moment vibrate inside her chest, like a hymn sung too softly for words. Harold straightened, eyes glassy. Couldn't let the year close without saying that. Marion stepped forward with a jar of apple butter wrapped in a tea towel. "For your pantry," she said. Harold accepted it with a nod. "For the memories," he replied, patting the photo stack. He turned to Aurora. "Take good care of him, of all of them. World's short on loyalty." "We will," Aurora promised, slipping Ajax's tag into her pocket as though tucking away a medal. With effort, Harold rose. John offered an arm, but the old man waved him off pride, carrying him the few steps back to his truck. Before climbing in, he glanced once more at the pack sprawled beneath the oak. Luna sun-sleeping, Bear gnawing a stick, Ash scanning the horizon, Night seated tall in sentinel pose. Harold tipped an invisible cap. The dogs watched until the truck disappeared down the road, a dust plume fading into sunlight. Aurora sat cross-legged on the grass, pulled the tag out again. Night lay beside her, head on her lap. She traced the embossed letters, then looked toward the lane where Harold's taillights had blinked goodbye. "Soldiers look after each other," she said. Night answered with a slow blink acceptance agreement, a pact renewed. Across the yard, wind stirred the leaves. The pages of Harold's old field manual fluttered on the picnic table, as if the past were turning itself gently to the next chapter. And beneath the oak, girl and guardian settled into the hush-quiet strength, woven from yesterday's battles and tomorrow's wide, open sky. A full year had passed, but the wood-grain scent of the barn still whispered of that first morning foreshadows in perfect formation among the straw. Now, as October's last sunset spilled molten gold through the slats, the space felt transformed. Bales stacked neatly, tack-oiled, and hung in soldier-straight rows. Strings of white fairy lights twined along rafters like constellations caught indoors. Aurora stood at the threshold, taller by an inch, hair a shade darker, yet in her eyes lingered the bright wonder of the girl who once froze at this doorway. She held a lantern in one hand, though she scarcely needed it. The sunset itself had chosen to gather here, painting dust motes into embers. At her feet lay her sentinels. Night, coat gone silver at the muzzle, stretched with regal ease near the old milking stall. Luna curled beside a half-empty feed bucket, paws tucked, chest rising in the rhythm of dream. Ash rested against the west wall, one ear flicking at barn swallows nesting overhead. Bear sprawled belly up, legs akimbo, snoring faintly forever, the clown in a warrior's frame. None stirred as Aurora entered. They sensed her presence the way mountains sense the wind. She crossed to the center of the floor, where a square of light burned brightest, set the lantern down, and drew a slow breath that tasted of hay, pine resin, and distant chimney smoke. "So much can change in 1 year," she said softly, her voice weaving with the rustle of straw. "School feels smaller. The world feels bigger. But this," she tapped her chest, "feels stronger." Night's eyes opened, ember bright in twilight. He lifted his head, and the others followed, a silent roll call. 4 pairs of eyes, 4 stories entwined with hers. She knelt, the hem of her flannel brushing straw. "I used to think you were sent to protect us," she continued, fingers carting through Night's ruff. "But that wasn't it." She looked from dog to dog, meeting each gaze with a steadiness learned through a dozen obstacle courses. 100 nightmares chased away, 1,000 shared dawns. "You were sent," she whispered, "so we could protect each other." Outside, the sun kissed the horizon, and shafts of light narrowed into a single copper beam that fanned across the barn floor, encircling them all. Dust motes swirled, like tiny planets orbiting a quiet sun. Night exhaled, a gentle huff. Luna's tail swished once. Ash lowered his head to his paws, content. Bear rolled to his side, one eye peeking as if winking at an inside joke they all now shared. Aurora closed her eyes, letting the warmth soak through skin and marrow feeling. Almost the heartbeat of the barn itself. Steadied, healed, at peace. The last sunlight slipped away, replaced by the soft hum of fairy lights overhead. She rose, lantern in hand, and whispered, "Come on, bedtime. Now." Night stood first, shaking straw from his coat. Luna flowed to her feet like moonlit water. Ash stretched, spine rippling. Bear lumbered upright with a sigh that made her laugh. Together they moved toward the door, Aurora leading, 4 silhouettes falling into easy formation behind her, not drafted, not commanded, simply willing. At the threshold, she paused, glancing back once more. The barn glowed faintly, posters still pinned near the latch. "My sentinels," its crayon colors a little paler but unbowed. Beneath it hung Mr. Harold's photo of Ajax and a new frame holding Aurora's junior handler certificate. Past, present, promise, all in a single collage. She clicked off the lantern, letting darkness settle where light had done its work, and stepped into the evening chill. Overhead, stars awakened one by one, indifferent to headlines, agents, or the hush of rural nights, yet somehow echoing the pulse that bound a girl and 4 battle-forged souls. On the porch, Marion waited with 2 mugs of cocoa for Aurora, one poured into a shallow bowl for whoever was fastest, Bear inevitably. John leaned against the rail, acoustic guitar in his lap, thumb brushing quiet chords. No cameras, No reporters, no restless questions, just the symphony of crickets, distant coyotes, and the steady breaths of guardians at ease. Aurora sipped, cocoa warming a smile into her cheeks. She watched night settle at the top step, nose angled toward the fields he once surveyed for threats, but now monitored like an old farmer checking weather, out of habit, not fear. Luna tucked close to Marion's feet. Ash wandered the yard perimeter, tail swinging in lazy arcs. Bear finished his cocoa bowl, then flopped under the porch swing with a satisfied grunt. John strummed a lullaby without words. The melody drifted across harvested rows, meeting the hush of autumn nightfall. Aurora's lids grew heavy, but she fought sleep long enough to memorize the moment. Guitar, cocoa steam, the scent of cut hay carried on cool air, and 4 silhouettes etched against starlight proof that scars can become landmarks, pointing not to pain but to place. She closed her eyes once more, breathing deep, and the words she'd spoken in the Barnacoden oath bound to fur, heartbeat, and hope. We protect each other. When she opened her eyes again, Night had turned to look at her, amber gaze alight. He didn't need to speak. Their story had already said enough. Somewhere far beyond the valley, news cycles churned and offers recalibrated. But here, on this porch, under this sky, the narrative reached its quiet coda for rescued warriors, one resilient girl, and a family made whole by the simple act of staying. Lights flicked off, door clicked shut, and the farm exhaled into stillness. In the barn, in the house, in every footprint worn into the soil, lay the echo of a promise kept long after the last light faded. Sentinels, yes, but first, and always, home. In the end, Night, Luna, Ash, and Bear remind us why we fall in love with animals, especially German shepherds, again and again. Their courage began as disciplined instinct, yet what truly saved a family and exposed a scandal was something far quieter, the everyday grace of loyalty. When we open our doors to creatures who have known hardship, we inherit their resilience, and they inherit our hope. That exchange doesn't need headlines, movie deals, or medals. It needs kindness at sunrise, a porch light left on, a safe place to dream. The Thompson story urges us to look beyond pedigree or past to the living heart in front of us. It celebrates second chances, the healing power of routine, and the quiet revolution that occurs when former assets become beloved companions. May we carry forward their example, advocating for working dog rescues, supporting ethical training, teaching children that strength and gentleness can share the same stride. And may we remember that every time we choose compassion over convenience, we loosen another chain, letting loyalty stretch its legs and run free beneath an open sky.